My name is Beatrix George. I am 29 years old, and I spend my days analyzing the microscopic hesitations in forged handwriting. I am a forensic document examiner. I know exactly what a lie looks like under a UV scanner. But 3 months ago, I had to watch a lie play out in the middle of the Annapolis Yacht Club. I was standing near the terrace doors with my husband, Grayson. We were at the annual charity gala my father hosted. 300 guests in silk gowns and dinner jackets were drinking champagne. Then my younger sister, Vanessa, tapped a microphone. She stood on the stage wearing a pale dress, looking fragile and brave. She looked right at me and said it into the microphone. I am pregnant, and the father is Grayson. 300 people gasped and turned to look at my husband. I did not drop my glass. I just watched Grayson shrink into his custom suit, refusing to meet my eyes. My own sister was claiming my husband fathered her child just to ruin my marriage and steal my life. And my parents were about to take her side. Before the night ended, I would be ordered to walk away from my own life with nothing. But what none of them knew was that I was about to find an old letter hidden in a wooden desk, a letter that would turn this entire high society scandal into a federal fraud investigation. Welcome to Morning Revenge, where we believe the truth does not need to shout. If you enjoy stories where calm women dismantle loud lies, drop a comment with your age and where you are watching from, and be sure to subscribe. Let me take you back to the moment the microphone cut through the string quartet. The air inside the ballroom smelled of roasted rosemary and sea salt. Grayson stood next to me. He worked for my father's shipping firm, and he spent every social event trying to secure his place in the family hierarchy. When Vanessa spoke his name, he did not step forward to defend me or deny it. He went pale and started wiping his palms on his trousers. My father, Richard, moved before the whispers could catch fire. In our waterfront community, family lineage and clean reputations are the only currency that matters. Scandal is bankruptcy. My father took the microphone from Vanessa and wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders. He smiled at the crowd and called it a private family matter, telling the band to play. Then he walked straight toward us. He grabbed my elbow hard enough to bruise and steered Grayson and me into the private cloakroom, shutting the heavy oak door. The silence in that small room was suffocating. He looked at me, not at Grayson. "You will file for divorce on Monday," my father said. His voice was a low rasp. "Irreconcilable differences. You will do it quietly. You will not drag this family name through the mud." He was already doing the math. He was calculating the damage to his shipping empire and deciding that sacrificing my marriage was the cheapest way to buy silence. I looked at Grayson. My husband was staring at his expensive leather shoes, nodding along with my father's decree. He was willing to throw me away just to keep his job. I felt the condensation from my gin and tonic pooling against my fingers. I could have screamed. I could have thrown the glass. But the emotional detachment that makes me good at my job settled over me like a heavy coat. "I see," I said. My voice was steady. I set my drink on a side table. I looked at my sister through the glass panel of the door, soaking up the sympathy of the room. I did not know yet how I was going to prove it, but I knew a forgery when I saw one, and Vanessa was the worst forgery of them all. The tires of the Mercedes hissed against the damp asphalt as we left the yacht club. The drive to our Annapolis waterfront estate took exactly 22 minutes. We spent every single one of those minutes trapped in a suffocating quiet. Grayson gripped the leather steering wheel so hard his knuckles resembled polished bone under the passing streetlights. He kept his gaze locked on the road ahead. He did not check his rearview mirror. He did not glance at the passenger seat. He drove like a man navigating a minefield. I looked out my window, watching the dark shape of the Severn River slide past the trees. The water resembled black glass, reflecting nothing but the sparse coastal lights. My mind shifted into the clinical gear I used at the forensic laboratory. I cataloged the physical evidence sitting in the driver's seat next to me. Grayson was sweating. The scent of his expensive Tom Ford cologne mixed with the sharp, unmistakable odor of pure panic. His breathing was shallow. He was not a man grieving the sudden destruction of his marriage. He was a man terrified of losing his corporate access card. We turned onto our private road. The tires crunched over the crushed white gravel of the long, circular driveway. The house loomed ahead. It was a sprawling colonial structure with 6 bedrooms, manicured hedges, and a private deepwater dock. My father, Richard, purchased the estate for us as a wedding gift 3 years ago. At the time, Grayson called it a generous blessing. Sitting in the passenger seat tonight, I finally recognized the architecture for what it really was. The house was a gilded cage, designed to ensure my husband remained a loyal, subservient employee to the George family shipping empire. Grayson parked the car and killed the engine. The sudden absence of machinery made the silence feel heavier. We walked through the grand double doors into the foyer. The central air conditioning blasted from the high ceilings, chilling the imported marble floors. I stepped out of my heels, holding them loosely by the straps. I waited for the apology. I waited for the frantic denial or the tearful confession. I waited for Grayson to act like a husband. Instead, he walked straight past me. He moved toward the far corner of the hallway where his leather golf bag stood propped against the wainscoting. He reached inside the heavy bag and pulled out a titanium 9-iron. He pulled a microfiber cloth from a side pocket and began wiping the smooth metal head. Then he carefully slotted the club back into its designated divider. He pulled out the 8-iron and repeated the process. Clink, wipe, clink. I stood in the center of the foyer watching this pathetic display. Grayson grew up in a middle-class suburb outside of Baltimore. He married into the George dynasty and became addicted to the privileges it afforded him. He loved the corner office, the tailored suits, and the invitations to the Commodore table. Reorganizing his golf clubs by precise height was a nervous tic he developed whenever my father threatened to cut the executive bonus pool. Grayson was standing in our home moments after my sister claimed to be carrying his child, and he was trying to soothe his anxiety about losing his country club membership. "Are you going to submit to a paternity test?" I asked. My voice carried upward, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. Grayson froze. His hand hovered over a pitching wedge. He slowly turned around, rubbing the back of his neck. His posture caved inward. "We cannot do that, Beatrix," he whispered. He refused to look at my eyes, staring instead at the baseboards. "You heard your father in the cloakroom. The shipping board members were at that gala tonight. The primary investors were standing right next to the ice sculpture. If we fight Vanessa right now, the gossip will tank the stock price before the market opens on Monday morning." I took a step closer to him. "You are telling me you want to let my sister pretend she is carrying your child just to keep the maritime investors happy?" I am not saying that he stammered. I am saying we have to play a strategic long game here. Vanessa is highly unstable. We both know her history. If she is denied publicly, she will run to the local press. She will turn this into a media circus. Richard wants a quiet divorce to protect the shipping routes and the corporate image. "Did you sleep with her?" I asked. I kept my tone flat and even, like I was asking a suspect to verify a fraudulent signature on a bank draft. Grayson looked at his leather loafers. He looked at the crystal chandelier. He looked at the golf bag. "I would never do something to intentionally hurt you," he said. His voice lacked any core conviction. "It is a massive misunderstanding. She is twisting things out of proportion. But we have to follow Richard on this protocol. Let her control the public narrative for a few months. Once the fiscal year ends and the new shipping contracts are locked, we can rebuild our relationship in private. We can figure it all out later. Just go along with the divorce filings for now." I stared at the man standing in front of me. In my profession, I dissect the anatomy of deception. I study how people press a pen too hard into paper when they are trying to trace a lie. Grayson was doing the exact same thing with his spoken words. He was avoiding the direct question. He was tracing over the facts, trying to make a poor forgery look authentic. He was not a criminal mastermind orchestrating a brilliant betrayal. He was a corporate parasite. He clung to my family wealth, sucking the prestige and the capital out of my father. My sister presented a threat that could sever his connection to the host. Grayson was perfectly willing to amputate me to to save his own skin. The lingering affection I held for him did not die in a fiery explosion. It withered and expired clinically, like a monitor flatlining in a sterile room. There was no anger left in my chest. There was only the cold, clear realization that my marriage was a hollow sham built on pure cowardice. I turned away from him and walked up the sweeping wooden staircase. Grayson stayed in the foyer. He did not chase after me. He went back to aligning his golf clubs. Clink, clink. I entered the master suite and pushed open the doors to my walk-in closet. The space smelled of cedar wood and expensive leather. It was filled with items my father and my husband bought to mold me into the perfect Annapolis wife. There were rows of designer gowns, silk blouses, and custom equestrian boots. I ignored every single one of them. I reached the top shelf and pulled down 2 standard canvas suitcases. I unzipped them and laid them flat on the king-size mattress. I did not pack a single garment purchased with George Family Trust money. I packed the tailored neutral slacks and blazers I bought using my own salary from the forensic laboratory. I packed my professional reference manuals, my magnifying loupe, and my ultraviolet light pens. I packed the comfortable flat shoes I wore when standing over a microscope for 10 hours a day. I moved to the mahogany vanity table. A velvet jewelry box sat in the center. I opened the lid and looked at the heavy diamond tennis bracelet Grayson gave me for our first anniversary. I looked at the pearl necklace my father presented to me the day I passed my board certification exams. I reached for my left hand and slid the platinum wedding band off my finger. The metal felt heavy and useless. I placed the ring inside the velvet box and snapped the lid shut. I zipped the 2 suitcases. The sound was sharp in the empty bedroom. I gripped the handles and walked back downstairs. By abandoning the superficial trappings of my marriage, I stripped Grayson of his final illusion of power over me. He was sitting on a velvet bench near the front door, holding a driver across his knees. He looked up when he heard the plastic wheels of my luggage rolling over the marble floor. His eyes widened in genuine shock. He looked at the bags and then up at my face. "What are you doing?" he asked. His voice cracked mid-sentence. "I am doing exactly what you and Richard requested," I said. "I am leaving, quietly." "Beatrix, please," he begged, standing up. "You cannot just walk out of the estate tonight. Where will you even go? It is past midnight." I walked past him toward the expansive kitchen island. A heavy bowl carved from dark stone sat on the counter. I reached into my purse and pulled out the leather keychain holding the key fob for the Mercedes. I dropped the keys into the stone bowl. They landed with a sharp crack that echoed off the stainless steel appliances. "I am taking the old sedan I bought in college," I told him. "You can explain to my father why his eldest daughter is driving a 10-year-old car out of his gated community." I walked back to the foyer and picked up my bags. Grayson reached out a hand as if to stop me, but he let his arm fall before his fingers even grazed my jacket sleeve. He was a man made of wet paper, holding on to a life built on quicksand. I stepped out the front door into the warm, humid night. I did not look back at the sprawling property. I left Grayson standing alone in the grand hallway, surrounded by empty rooms and expensive things he did not earn. His psychological unraveling was already beginning. Without me acting as his human shield, he would have to face my father and my deceptive sister alone. I loaded my bags into the trunk of my old sedan and started the engine. The dashboard illuminated, casting a faint orange glow over my hands. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the gates, heading toward the city. I needed a cheap place to stay, and I needed to settle the final pieces of my old life. That meant returning to my childhood home in the morning to collect a specific piece of wooden furniture. I had no idea that clearing out my old desk would hand me the exact weapon I needed to bury my sister and her lies forever. The rhythmic hum of the neon pharmacy sign outside my window became my new evening lullaby. I signed a 12-month lease on a functional one-bedroom apartment situated in the commercial center of downtown Baltimore. The space was modest and sterile. Rough, exposed brick walls replaced the imported silk wallpaper of my previous residence. The ambient noise of passing traffic and distant sirens replaced the suffocating dead silence of that Annapolis waterfront estate. I embraced the stark environment immediately. It allowed my racing mind to rest. I was no longer a decorative accessory existing within a maritime shipping dynasty. I was simply Beatrix George again. Over the next 3 days, I finalized the legal separation of my personal belongings. I refused to ask for alimony. I surrendered my claim to the marital home and the shared investment accounts. My divorce attorney told me I was acting irrationally, but I understood the true cost of accepting George family money. Their financial support always came attached to a strict gag order. I wanted a clean break. I only requested one specific item from my childhood bedroom. My mother purchased a solid cedar writing desk for my 16th birthday. It was the exact place where I first learned to study ink patterns and paper grains. I arranged for a private moving company to retrieve the furniture. I refused to let Grayson or my father have any excuse to contact me regarding the delivery logistics. The delivery men hauled the heavy wood up 3 flights of stairs on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. They positioned it against the exposed brick wall in the living room and departed. The apartment smelled faintly of aged cedar and lingering dust. I spent the evening cleaning the wood surface. I wiped down the polished finish with a soft microfiber cloth, restoring the shine to the brass handles. My mother, Evelyn, loved this particular desk. She died suddenly of an undiagnosed aneurysm 10 years ago. Her passing left a hollow space in our household that my father immediately filled with his relentless obsession over social status. Without her grounding presence, my sister Vanessa realized she could manipulate our father using fabricated crises and performative tears. Evelyn was the only person who saw through the sweet, innocent facade Vanessa projected to the world. As I pulled out the bottom right drawer to clean the interior tracks, my forensic training took over. My hands are conditioned to detect microscopic physical inconsistencies. When I lifted the wooden storage box, I noticed the weight distribution felt remarkably uneven. I ran my fingertips along the inside joining panels. The external depth of the drawer measured 12 inches, but the internal storage space only accommodated 9 inches. It was a classic false bottom compartment. I pressed my thumbs into the rear corners, applying steady pressure against the wood grain. A hidden mechanical latch clicked loudly. The false floor popped upward, revealing a shallow, hidden cavity. Inside the concealed compartment lay a single, sealed envelope. The paper felt thick and yellowed with age. I picked it up, holding it carefully by the outer edges to preserve any latent physical impressions. The front bore my father's given name, written in flowing cursive ink. I recognized the penmanship instantly. The fluid upward loops and the distinct forward slant belonged entirely to my mother. She wrote this letter a decade ago. I retrieved a pair of white cotton gloves and a steel letter opener from my work satchel. I sliced the top edge of the envelope open using precise, measured movements. I unfolded the heavy stationery and spread it flat across the desk. The ink was a dark navy blue. My mother documented a strict timeline of events that occurred just weeks before her sudden death. She detailed a pattern of pathological lying exhibited by my younger sister. Vanessa was 16 years old at the time. She was dating a teenage boy from a prominent local banking family. When he attempted to end their relationship, Vanessa presented him with a typed letter from a regional medical clinic. The forged document claimed she was suffering from a rare blood disease and required expensive private treatments. She used the fake medical diagnosis to extort cash from the boy and emotionally force him to stay by her side. My mother wrote about discovering the discarded practice sheets in the bathroom trash can. She described how Vanessa used stolen hospital letterhead and forged the attending physician's signature by tracing it against a glass window. Evelyn planned to present this comprehensive dossier to Richard. She wanted to send Vanessa to a specialized behavioral facility out of state. But my mother suffered her fatal aneurysm before she could deliver the envelope. She hid the documents inside my desk, knowing my father would simply incinerate the evidence to protect his immaculate public reputation. My father always preferred a comfortable illusion over a messy reality. I sat on the hardwood floor, reading the paragraphs a second time. The hum of the neon sign vibrated against the window glass. A profound sense of professional clarity washed over me. I now possess the historical baseline of my sister's fraudulent behavior. My mother documented the exact pathology Vanessa was utilizing right now. The teenage blood disease scam was the precise prototype for the current pregnancy lie. The deceptive tactics were identical. She weaponized fake medical records to trap a weak man and extort resources. I needed to examine the letter closer. I set up my portable forensic workstation on the kitchen counter. I plugged in the ultraviolet lamp and adjusted the focal lens on my magnifying loupe. I slid the letter under the blue light. I analyzed the pressure points of her handwriting. The steady, confident strokes proved my mother was of sound mind when she drafted the affidavit. She listed specific physical characteristics of Vanessa's forgery style. My sister had a distinct habit of pressing the pen too firmly on the downward stroke of the letter T. She also struggled with the spacing between vowels, always leaving an unnatural gap after the letter E. This information was a forensic goldmine. In the world of question document examination, proving malicious intent is often the hardest hurdle. You must demonstrate a systematic pattern of deception. My mother handed me a verified 10-year-old primary source that established a chronic history of fraud. Richard could not contradict his late wife. He built a shrine to her memory, acting like the tragic grieving widower to win sympathy at yacht club charity fundraisers. If this letter surfaced, it would force him to choose between honoring his beloved Evelyn or protecting his deceitful youngest child. But a historical document was only half of the equation. To build an airtight federal case, I needed contemporary physical evidence. I needed the documents Vanessa was currently using to convince my family she was carrying a child. I knew my father demanded a paper trail for everything. He would never authorize a trust fund payout or a divorce settlement without seeing medical proof. Vanessa had to submit an ultrasound or a doctor's note to the family attorneys. I packed the letter into an evidence collection bag and sealed it. I locked the plastic pouch inside a fireproof safe hidden in my bedroom closet. I was no longer fighting a domestic dispute. I was preparing a fraud investigation. My sister thought she was untouchable because she played the victim perfectly. She believed crying in a ballroom shielded her from consequence. She forgot that tears leave physical stains on paper. I needed to acquire those new documents. I needed to put her current lies under my microscope. I reached for my phone and dialed the direct line of a sympathetic clerk working at my father's law firm. I contacted a paralegal named Sarah who worked at the primary law firm handling my father's estate. Sarah owed me a profound professional favor from several years ago when I helped her untangle a fraudulent commercial lease agreement that nearly bankrupted her parents. I asked her to quietly pull the recent administrative filings categorized under the George Family Trust. We agreed to meet at a small independent coffee shop located near the Inner Harbor. The weather outside was unforgivingly humid, leaving a film of moisture on the cafe windows. Sarah arrived wearing a beige trench coat. She slid a standard manila folder across the sticky wooden table. She looked incredibly anxious, checking the reflections in the glass before leaving the premises without even ordering a beverage. I carried the dense folder back to my private laboratory space. My firm operated out of a sleek, modernized commercial building situated in downtown Baltimore. The internal environment was rigorously sterile and climate-controlled. The industrial air filtration system hummed a low, continuous note, keeping the humidity at a precise level to protect sensitive parchment. The stainless steel examination tables gleamed under stark white LED ceiling panels. This was my true domain. I was no longer a discarded wife hiding in a sparse apartment. I was a senior questioned document examiner, actively hunting a predator. I placed the manila folder on the central workstation. I opened the cardboard flap and extracted the contents using a pair of clean bamboo tongs to avoid transferring epidermal oils. Vanessa had submitted 2 distinct pieces of evidence to the trust attorneys while requesting an emergency financial stipend for high-risk maternal care. The first item was a printed, glossy ultrasound image. The second item was a handwritten diagnostic note, purportedly signed by a prominent Annapolis obstetrician, recommending immediate, strict bed rest. I started my analysis with the handwritten medical note. I positioned the crisp paper beneath a high-powered stereo microscope and switched on the blue glare of the ultraviolet document scanner. The ambient room lights dimmed automatically, responding to the UV activation. Under the ultraviolet spectrum, the invisible physical landscape of the paper revealed its hidden secrets. Normal fluid handwriting leaves a smooth, continuous trail of ink distribution. When a person writes naturally, their hand glides across the page, creating fine, tapered edges wherever the pen lifts from the surface. The ink distribution on this diagnostic note looked fundamentally wrong. I leaned into the microscope eyepieces, carefully focusing the optical lenses. The cursive loops contained minute tremors. These jagged, irregular edges indicated the author was moving the ballpoint pen at an unnaturally slow, deliberate speed. People only write that slowly when they are drawing shapes rather than forming familiar linguistic characters. I adjusted the magnification dial, analyzing the physical ink density. There were distinct pools of dark fluid resting at the apex of several consonants. These unnatural pen lifts occurred mid-stroke. A genuine busy doctor scribbling a routine medical recommendation never stops the pen in the middle of a short word. Furthermore, the overall ink pressure appeared entirely blunt and uniform. The physical indentation on the paper fibers was heavy from start to finish. This mechanical consistency is the hallmark of a tracing technique. Someone placed a genuine signature over a glowing light box and copied the outline onto a blank hospital prescription pad. My sister was not a sophisticated criminal mastermind. She was a reckless amateur, relying on the predictable arrogance of our social circle. In our elite waterfront community, wealthy people rarely questioned a crying woman holding a hospital letterhead. They feared the awkwardness of verification far more than they feared deceit. Vanessa counted on that cultural cowardice to act as her shield. I stepped away from the microscope and walked over to my secure evidence locker in the corner of the lab. I entered the complex numeric sequence and retrieved the sealed pouch containing my mother's old letter. Evelyn had carefully preserved original samples of Vanessa's teenage forgery attempts, hiding them inside the envelope. I extracted the 10-year-old practice sheets and laid them flat on the steel table, right next to the current obstetrician note. I lowered the overhead macroscopic camera to capture both documents simultaneously. The dual high-resolution images populated on my dual monitor setup. I activated our proprietary digital overlay software. My pulse remained steady as I initiated the comparative forensic analysis. Handwriting is a complex biomechanical process heavily influenced by deep muscle memory. Even when individuals actively attempt to disguise their script, they inevitably leak subconscious identifying physical traits. I instructed the software to isolate the lowercase letter G in both writing samples. The comparative results materialized on the glowing digital screens. When Vanessa formed a lowercase g, she consistently started the upper circle at the 2 o'clock position, pulling the pen counterclockwise. She then dragged the descending tail downward at a sharp, rigid angle instead of a smooth, natural curve. She ended the bottom loop with a harsh, horizontal strike. It was a highly idiosyncratic letter formation, unique to her motor skills. I zoomed the camera in on the signature of the fake obstetrician. The letter G in the doctor's forged surname mirrored the teenage practice sheets flawlessly. The starting position, the rigid descent, the sharp terminal strike all matched the historical baseline perfectly. Next, I analyzed the spatial relationships between the characters. Vanessa possessed a peculiar structural habit regarding her vowels. She always left exactly 1 millimeter of empty space after writing the letter E, breaking the continuous cursive chain, before starting the subsequent consonant. I measured the gaps on the diagnostic note using a digital micrometer tool. The spacing was geometrically identical. The biometric fingerprint was undeniable. My sister forged the medical request using the exact same physical habits she developed back in high school. The blue glare of the UV scanner painted my hands in a ghostly pale hue. The reality of the situation expanded far beyond a petty domestic squabble. Vanessa was not simply lying to our parents to ruin my marriage and steal social sympathy. By submitting these forged documents to the trust attorneys, she crossed a severe criminal threshold. The George Family Trust operated across multiple financial institutions bordering Maryland and Delaware. Sending fabricated medical claims through the mail to secure an emergency cash stipend constituted felony wire fraud. She committed a federal crime. I stood alone in the quiet laboratory listening to the steady hum of the air filters. The hidden pieces of her trap were finally becoming clear. She engineered the public scandal at the charity gala to force a rapid, quiet divorce. She knew my father would pay astronomical sums to sweep the embarrassment under the rug. But Vanessa was incredibly greedy. She was not satisfied with a simple discretionary payout from the family accounts. My phone vibrated on the stainless steel counter, breaking the analytical atmosphere. I picked it up, checking the encrypted messaging application I used to communicate with my paralegal contact. Sarah sent a brief, urgent text message. She typed that Vanessa is accelerating her operational timeline. My sister just submitted a formal demand letter to the senior partners at the firm. She is not just asking for a monthly cash stipend anymore. She is actively demanding Grayson sign over his voting shares in the logistics company to establish a permanent, irrevocable trust for the unborn baby. They have a preliminary transfer meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. I locked the phone screen. The sheer scope of the financial extortion was staggering. Grayson was a weak, fragile man, but he held significant equity in the shipping empire. If Vanessa forced him to surrender those shares, she would secure an unbreakable grip on the George family board of directors. She was attempting a hostile corporate takeover using a non-existent child as leverage. Grayson was currently crumbling under the immense social pressure. He was terrified of my father and desperate to save his fading country club reputation. I knew he would sign the equity transfer papers without demanding a single medical test. He would gladly hand my sister the keys to the kingdom just to make the immediate panic disappear. I could not allow that transaction to occur. But I also could not burst into the corporate boardroom and shout about forged signatures. If I confronted them without the proper tactical setup, my father would just hire expensive defense lawyers to protect Vanessa from federal prosecution. He would bury my physical evidence to save his own surname from the newspaper headlines. I needed to let my sister walk deeper into her own trap. I needed to watch her extort my cowardly husband while I gathered the final digital proof to ruin her. I gathered the files, sliding them into my secure briefcase. It was time to monitor a corporate shakedown. I sat at the primary workstation in my downtown Baltimore laboratory, staring at a dual monitor setup. The environmental control system hummed its steady low note, keeping the air crisp and dry. My physical surroundings were perfectly sterile, but my digital connection placed me directly inside the most toxic room in Maryland. I wore a small wireless earpiece in my left ear. Through an encrypted audio channel, I listened to a live feed of the executive boardroom at my father's corporate law firm. My paralegal contact, Sarah, was sitting in the corner of that mahogany-paneled room, fulfilling her duties as the official stenographer for the meeting. She conveniently forgot to mute the microphone on her tablet. The audio quality was sharp enough to capture the ambient tension. I heard the distinct rustle of heavy cardstock files being opened. Then I heard the arrogant, heavy thud of a designer handbag hitting the center of the polished mahogany table. That was Vanessa. She carried a custom Birkin bag that cost more than a luxury sedan. She never worked a single day to earn the funds required to purchase it. My sister treated the George Family Trust as her own private treasury, withdrawing capital whenever she felt bored or underappreciated. Now she was aiming for a much larger prize. Through the earpiece, I listened as the senior trust attorney cleared his throat. He outlined the purpose of the emergency session. Vanessa was no longer simply requesting a monthly cash stipend to cover her fabricated high-risk maternal care. She escalated her demands overnight. She claimed the stress of the impending divorce was jeopardizing her health. To secure her future, and the future of the George family heir, she required Grayson to formally surrender his voting equity in the logistics company. She wanted his shares transferred into a blind trust, which she would control as the sole trustee until the child reached the age of majority. It was a brilliant, predatory maneuver. Grayson possessed a substantial portfolio of voting shares given to him by my father upon our marriage. Those shares represented real corporate power. If Vanessa captured that equity, she would secure a permanent, unbreakable grip on the shipping empire's board of directors. She was attempting a hostile corporate takeover, disguising it as maternal anxiety. I heard Grayson let out a shaky, shallow breath. He was sitting across the table from her. I could picture him sweating into his tailored collar. He spent his entire adult life climbing the corporate ladder, desperate to shed his middle-class origins and belong to the Annapolis elite. He was terrified of my father and paralyzed by the threat of public ruin. Instead of fighting the extortion, he was preparing to surrender. I heard the metallic click of a luxury fountain pen being uncapped. He was getting ready to sign his corporate life away, just to buy a few months of silence. If his pen touched that signature line, the legal untangling would require years of federal litigation. I needed to halt the transaction today. But intervening directly was a tactical error. If I burst into that boardroom and accused my sister of fraud, my father would instantly deploy a team of defense lawyers to protect her. He would bury my evidence to save his own surname from the business journals. I had to stop the transfer from the shadows. I turned my attention to the high-resolution monitors on my desk. While the audio feed played in my ear, I accessed the digital evidence file Sarah securely transmitted to me an hour earlier. The folder contained the original electronic copy of the ultrasound image Vanessa submitted to the legal team. To the untrained eye, the black and white static image looked like a standard medical scan. It featured the faint gray outline of a fetus, complete with numerical measurements printed along the dark margins. A layman would accept it without a second thought. But digital files carry invisible fingerprints. Every image captured by a modern machine embeds hidden metadata directly into the file architecture. I opened a specialized forensic extraction program and dragged the ultrasound file into the processing window. I initiated a deep dive into the exchangeable image file format data. The software stripped away the visual pixels and exposed the underlying source code. I watched the lines of text scroll rapidly across my screen, detailing the origin of the document. A genuine hospital ultrasound contains specific diagnostic tags. It registers the serial number of the medical imaging machine, the proprietary software version of the hospital network, and the exact time the transducer captured the sound waves. Vanessa's file contained none of those medical markers. Instead, the metadata revealed a commercial licensing tag. The image contained a hidden digital watermark tracing back to a global stock photography website. The software provided the exact timestamp of the original download. The file was pulled from the commercial server exactly 3 days before the Yacht Club charity gala. I highlighted the digital receipt on my screen. The purchase price for the high-resolution medical image was $12. My sister was orchestrating a multi-million-dollar corporate shakedown using a fake baby she bought online for $12. The audacity was staggering, but her technical ignorance was her fatal flaw. She assumed the attorneys would glance at the picture and file it away in a physical cabinet. She never considered that digital artifacts tell a flawless, sequential story. Over the earpiece, I heard the trust attorney instructing Grayson to initial the bottom of page 4. The timeline was rapidly collapsing. I had less than 2 minutes before the equity transfer became legally binding. I minimized the extraction software and opened an encrypted communication network, routed through a series of anonymous proxy servers. I needed to deliver the stock photo evidence to someone inside that boardroom who possessed the authority to halt the meeting, but lacked the loyalty to protect my father. I selected Theodore Kensington. He served as the chief compliance officer for the law firm. Theodore was a rigid, humorless man who worshipped federal regulations. He spent his career terrified of independent audits and Securities and Exchange Commission violations. If he suspected a transaction involved fraudulent documentation, he would freeze the entire building to protect his own professional license. I drafted a brief, sterile email addressed directly to Theodore's private firm account. I did not include any accusations or emotional context. I simply typed the internal file number of the equity transfer, followed by the direct web link to the commercial stock photo library. I attached a screenshot of the metadata proving the ultrasound matched the $12 download. I clicked Send. The digital packet vanished into the encrypted routing network, untraceable and definitive. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, pressing the earpiece deeper into my ear canal. I waited for the trap to spring. 10 seconds later, a sharp buzzing sound interrupted the quiet drone of the boardroom. The audio feed picked up the sound of a heavy chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Theodore Kensington cleared his throat. His voice sounded tight and strained. "Please put the pen down," Grayson Theodore instructed. His tone lacked any polite negotiation. It was a direct corporate command. I heard Grayson stammer, asking if there was a typo in the contract language. "There is no typo," Theodore replied, "but I am instituting an immediate suspension of this equity transfer. A discrepancy regarding the supporting medical documentation has just been flagged by our internal compliance system. Under federal fiduciary regulations, I cannot authorize the movement of these voting shares until a mandatory independent review is conducted." The silence that followed was heavy and electric. My father demanded an explanation, his voice rising in anger. He hated losing control of any room he occupied. Theodore refused to elaborate, citing strict compliance protocols and liability concerns. He formally adjourned the meeting and instructed his legal staff to exit the premises. Then I heard Vanessa. Her breath caught in her throat, producing a sharp, panicked sound. "You cannot just stop the transfer," she argued. Her voice was shrill, stripping away the fragile victim persona she carefully cultivated. "We had an agreement. My health is failing. The baby needs security right now." "I am sorry," Theodore said, sounding entirely unsympathetic. "The shares remain exactly where they are until the documentation is verified by an outside medical auditor. Have a good afternoon." The boardroom doors opened and closed as the attorneys filed out, leaving my family sitting in the wreckage of their failed extortion attempt. Vanessa slammed her hands against the mahogany table. She cursed Grayson for hesitating and blamed my father for hiring incompetent lawyers. The paranoia in her voice was unmistakable. She realized she lost control of the narrative, but she had no idea who pulled the invisible strings. I removed the earpiece and set it on the cold steel workstation. A profound sense of satisfaction washed over me. I paralyzed her financial strike without ever showing my face. But I knew the delay was only temporary. My father would not tolerate a bureaucratic hurdle for long. He would demand a united family front to soothe the nervous legal partners. Less than an hour later, my phone vibrated with a calendar invitation. Richard was summoning Grayson, Vanessa, and me to a mandatory private brunch at the country club this coming Sunday. He intended to force a resolution and project an image of perfect domestic harmony. I accepted the digital invitation immediately. Vanessa was currently operating in a state of blind frustration. It was the perfect psychological condition for my next maneuver. I prepared to attend the Sunday brunch not as an obedient daughter, but as a forensic examiner ready to interrogate a suspect. I was going to look my sister in the eye and drop the first deliberate hint that her entire house of paper was about to burn to the ground. The dining room of the Annapolis Country Club smelled of starched linen and expensive hollandaise sauce. It was a sprawling space designed to showcase the immense privilege of its members. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed view of the private marina where million-dollar yachts bobbed in the gentle morning tide. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved silently between tables, pouring imported champagne into crystal flutes. This was the epicenter of Maryland maritime society. It was a place where image dictated reality, and uncomfortable truths were buried under layers of polite conversation. I arrived precisely at 11 o'clock. The maitre d' guided me to a secluded corner booth reserved under the George family name. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the table. He wore a navy blue blazer adorned with the gold crest of the yacht club. He looked the part of the distinguished patriarch, commanding the space with his mere presence. Vanessa sat to his right. She wore a flowing floral dress with a high empire waist intentionally designed to suggest the early stages of maternity. She possessed a radiant, performative glow, sipping sparkling water with a twist of lime. She rested her left hand delicately over her flat stomach, a constant physical reminder of her fabricated victimhood. Grayson sat directly across from her. My husband looked entirely out of place in the bright morning sunlight. Dark purple circles shadowed his eyes. His skin carried a pale grayish tint. He stared at his empty coffee cup, looking like a man marching toward a steep cliff. I took the remaining leather seat opposite my father. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer and a simple silk blouse. I did not look like a defeated woman mourning the sudden implosion of her marriage. I looked like a professional arriving for a routine corporate deposition. "Thank you for coming, Beatrix," my father said. His tone was brisk and businesslike. He did not ask how I was settling into my new apartment. He did not offer a shred of paternal sympathy. He wanted to finalize the terms of my quiet exit from the family structure. I ordered a plain black coffee from the hovering waiter. I folded my hands on the table and waited. "We need to formalize the separation." Richard continued lowering his voice to prevent the neighboring tables from eavesdropping. "Grayson has retained legal counsel. The initial paperwork will be drafted by Tuesday. We are aiming for a seamless transition. No contested assets, no public drama. The family trust will provide a generous severance package to assist you with your new living arrangements." I listened to him frame my divorce as a corporate layoff. He wanted to buy my silence and protect the shipping routes from the stain of domestic scandal. Vanessa sighed, leaning forward, her eyes pooled with practiced, unshed tears. "This is so incredibly hard for everyone," she whispered. Her voice carried that delicate, fragile vibration she perfected over the years. "I know you are hurting, Beatrix. I never wanted to destroy your happiness, but the stress of this entire situation is becoming dangerous for the baby. My doctor is very concerned about my elevated heart rate. I just want peace for our family. I hope eventually you can find it in your heart to forgive us." I looked at my bread plate. A silver butter knife rested next to a warm croissant. I picked up the knife, gripping the ornate handle. I pressed the serrated metal edge against the porcelain rim of the plate. I dragged it backward, applying steady, deliberate pressure. The sharp metallic scrape pierced the polite hum of the dining room. It was a high-pitched, terrible sound that severed Vanessa's monologue instantly. Grayson flinched in his chair. My father blinked, his jaw tightening at the sudden breach of country club etiquette. "My apologies," I said smoothly. I set the knife down. My hand slipped. I picked up my coffee cup and took a slow sip. The dark roast was bitter and grounding. I looked directly into my sister's wide eyes. "You are right to be concerned about stress, Vanessa," I said. I kept my voice measured and conversational. High-stress situations cause people to make very careless mistakes. We see the resulting fallout at the forensic laboratory every single week. Desperation breeds sloppy execution. Richard frowned, stirring a packet of sugar into his tea. "I hardly think this is the appropriate setting to discuss your morbid crime lab cases, Beatrix." I ignored him, keeping my gaze locked on my sister. "In fact, I am consulting on a fascinating federal case right now," I continued. "The timing is quite a coincidence. A young woman in Virginia is currently facing federal indictment for wire fraud. She attempted to extort a substantial sum from her wealthy ex-boyfriend using fabricated medical records." Vanessa's hand froze halfway to her water glass. She did not take the sip. She lowered her hand back to the table. The tips of her manicured fingers pressed hard against the white tablecloth. She claimed she needed emergency surgery. I explained dissecting the fictional narrative with surgical precision. She submitted a digital diagnostic scan to his legal team, requesting an immediate cash transfer. Amateurs always believe a digital scan is bulletproof. They download a random stock image from the internet, tweak the contrast filters, and assume the corporate lawyers will simply file it away in a drawer without a second glance. Grayson fits his weight. The leather chair squeaked under him. He looked up at me, his eyes darting frantically. He was present in the boardroom when Theodore Kensington halted the equity transfer, citing a medical documentation discrepancy. Grayson was just starting to connect the dots. The problem is, digital files carry invisible receipts, I said, offering Vanessa a pleasant, chilling smile. Every downloaded image contains embedded metadata. We pulled the file architecture and found the commercial licensing tag. She bought her fake illness online for $14. Mail fraud across state lines carries a mandatory minimum sentence in federal prison. I watched the delicate skin at the base of Vanessa's throat. A rapid, erratic pulse fluttered right above her collarbone. Her carefully constructed maternal glow vanished, replaced by the pale sheen of genuine terror. But the handwritten documents are always my favorite part of the job, I noted, cutting a small piece of my croissant. Forgers lack physical confidence. They press the pen too hard against the paper, trying to trace a signature. The ink pooling gives them away instantly under a standard ultraviolet scanner. It is remarkable how easily a microscopic hesitation mark can destroy a $1 million lie. The ice cubes in Vanessa's glass rattled. Her hands were shaking so severely she could no longer hide the tremors under the table. She stared at me, recognizing the specific terminology. She remembered the high school practice sheets. She realized I was not just telling a random anecdote. I was reading her exact methodology back to her, in front of the man she was trying to rob. "Excuse me," Vanessa gasped. She pushed her chair back abruptly. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the floorboards. Morning sickness. I need the restroom. She turned and fled, dodging a waiter carrying a tray of mimosas. She practically sprinted toward the polished oak doors of the lobby, abandoning her fragile pregnant walk entirely. My father watched her disappear down the corridor. He turned back to me, his expression hardening into a familiar glare. "That was unnecessary and cruel, Beatrix," he reprimanded. His voice was a harsh whisper. "Your sister is carrying a child. Her hormones are erratic. Terrorizing her with stories of federal prison over a brunch table is beneath you." I looked at Richard, analyzing the micro-expressions mapping his face. He was angry, but his anger lacked its usual solid foundation. His eyes darted toward the empty chair where Vanessa had been sitting. He remembered the sudden, inexplicable halt to the corporate equity transfer yesterday. He was a ruthless businessman who built a shipping empire by calculating risk and identifying liabilities. I just introduced a massive unknown variable into his pristine equation. The seed of doubt was successfully planted in his mind. He was starting to wonder if the daughter he was protecting was actually a catastrophic financial liability. "You asked for a quiet exit, Richard," I said, wiping my mouth with a linen napkin. "I am simply explaining the mechanics of the real world. Actions carry physical evidence. Evidence dictates the outcome. I will review the divorce settlement when Grayson sends it." I stood up from the table, leaving my meal untouched. Grayson stared up at me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fear. He realized I was not a passive victim waiting to be discarded. He realized I possessed the intellectual weaponry to dismantle his entire life, and I was entirely willing to use it. I walked out of the dining room, the rhythmic click of my heels echoing off the hardwood floor. I left them sitting in the wreckage of their ruined Sunday brunch. The psychological pressure was now intolerable. I knew Grayson and Vanessa could not endure this quiet terror for long. They were cornered animals. To survive, they would have to launch a desperate, aggressive strike, using the legal system to try and force my silence. I welcomed their next move. I was already preparing the perfect discovery request to catch them when they finally lunged. The process server arrived at my laboratory on a rainy Thursday afternoon. He handed me a thick manila envelope sealed with heavy legal tape. I signed his clipboard with a steady hand. I did not rush to tear the paper open. I finished my shift calibrating the microscopic lenses on my workstation before I finally sat down to review the contents. Grayson had filed the formal petition for divorce. He did not ask for an amicable separation. Driven by panic and manipulated by my sister, he launched a predatory legal strike designed to financially cripple me and ensure my perpetual silence. I read through the pages analyzing the specific clauses. The audacity of his demands was almost impressive. Grayson was requesting substantial spousal support. His attorney argued that his future earning capacity was severely compromised due to impending paternal obligations. He claimed he required alimony from my forensic consulting salary to maintain his standard of living while providing for a new dependent. Furthermore, the petition included a draconian non-disclosure agreement. The document stipulated a permanent gag order regarding the circumstances of our marital dissolution. If I signed it, I would be legally forbidden from ever discussing Vanessa or the origin of her supposed child. He was trying to buy my silence, using my own paycheck. Grayson assumed I would fold under the pressure. He spent 3 years watching me navigate the polite, restrained society of the Annapolis elite. He mistook my quiet demeanor for fragility. He thought a stack of intimidating legal jargon would force me into submission. He forgot that I dissect intimidating documents for a living. I did not hire a traditional family law practitioner. Divorce attorneys focus on equitable division and emotional mediation. I had no interest in mediation. I wanted a surgical strike. I walked down the hall to the corner office of my forensic firm and handed the petition to Thomas. Thomas served as our senior legal counsel. He spent his entire career navigating complex federal fraud cases, defending our laboratory findings during grueling cross-examinations. He was a man who appreciated cold, empirical facts. He read through Grayson's demands, tapping a silver pen against his wooden desk. "This is a shakedown," Thomas said, pushing his reading glasses down the bridge of his nose. "Your husband is weaponizing the family court system to protect a fraudulent asset." "I know," I replied. "He is claiming financial hardship based on a medical condition that does not exist. He opened the door to his own destruction. I want to compel physical proof." We spent the next 2 hours drafting the counter response. We did not argue over the division of property. We did not contest the value of the shared investment accounts. Instead, we focused entirely on the legal justification Grayson used to demand alimony. By introducing the unborn child as a central financial liability in the divorce proceedings, he made the existence of that child legally relevant to the settlement. The meeting took place 4 days later. The venue was a sterile, imposing boardroom located inside a high-rise building in downtown Baltimore. Grayson retained a prestigious litigator named Mr. Caldwell. Caldwell was a man who wore custom silk suits and possessed the kind of practiced, arrogant smirk intended to unnerve opposing counsel. I arrived wearing a dark gray suit carrying a single leather portfolio. Thomas walked beside me, projecting a quiet, formidable presence. We took our seats on one side of the vast glass table. Grayson sat opposite me. He looked worse than he did at the country club brunch. He had lost weight. His collar hung loosely around his neck. He kept his gaze fixed on a glass of water resting in front of him, entirely unable to meet my eyes. Caldwell opened the proceedings with a rehearsed speech. He spoke about the unfortunate deterioration of the marriage and the need for a swift, discreet resolution. He slid a crisp printed contract across the glass surface. "My client is willing to expedite the filing process," Caldwell stated, leaning back in his expensive leather chair. "If you agree to the spousal support terms and sign the non-disclosure addendum today, we can finalize the decree without requiring a lengthy public trial. It is the most pragmatic option for everyone involved." I looked at the contract. The paper was standard bright white stock. The ink was fresh. It was a monument to their collective cowardice. I did not reach for a pen. I opened my leather portfolio and extracted a single, heavily redacted file. I placed it on top of their settlement offer and slid both documents back across the smooth glass. Caldwell frowned. His arrogant smirk faltered as he picked up the new document. He adjusted his posture, reading the bold heading printed at the top of the page. "This is a formal notice of discovery," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. I noted the exact moment the realization hit Caldwell. His eyes widened slightly as he scanned the specific legal demands. Since your client is citing impending paternal financial hardship as the primary justification for seeking alimony from my estate, I explained the physical existence and medical status of the child are now central material facts in this litigation. We are formally requesting that Vanessa submit to an independent court-ordered medical examination to verify the pregnancy. The ambient temperature in the boardroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. Grayson finally looked up. His face drained of all color, leaving his skin a sickly, chalky hue. Caldwell dropped the paper onto the table. He recovered his composure quickly, but his voice carried a sharp, defensive edge. "This is highly irregular," he objected. "You are attempting to drag a third party into a standard marital dissolution. We will file an immediate motion to quash this request. It is a blatant invasion of privacy." Thomas leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "It is not an invasion of privacy when your client introduces the third party as the basis for his financial demands," Thomas countered smoothly. "You cannot use a medical condition as a sword to extract alimony and then claim privacy as a shield to prevent verification. If Grayson needs my client's money to support a new dependent, we have the legal right to confirm the dependent actually exists." I watched Grayson swallow hard. His throat tightened visibly. He was trapped, and he knew it. The logic was a perfect, airtight vice. They had two choices. Grayson could withdraw the request for alimony and drop the gag order entirely. If he did that, he would forfeit the predatory settlement and lose the legal mechanism keeping me quiet. He would have to walk away with nothing, leaving himself vulnerable to the truth. Or they could fight the discovery request in front of a family court judge. If they chose to fight, Thomas would present the arguments in a public forum. The judge would undoubtedly rule in our favor. The court would mandate a medical examination performed by an impartial, state-appointed physician. That examination would instantly expose the fact that my sister was not carrying a child. Refuse the exam and lose the settlement. Take the exam and expose the fake pregnancy. There was no third option. Caldwell looked at his client. Grayson was staring at the notice of discovery like it was a live explosive device resting on the table. The high-priced lawyer finally realized his client had lied to him. Caldwell recognized that he was unknowingly participating in an extortion scheme built on fabricated evidence. The arrogant smirk dissolved entirely, replaced by a tight grimace of professional liability. "We will need time to review this document," Caldwell said stiffly, gathering his papers and placing them back into his briefcase. "Take all the time you need," I replied, standing up from my chair, "but the discovery clock starts today. You have 14 days to produce the medical verification, or we will schedule the hearing." I walked out of the boardroom with Thomas beside me. We left Grayson sitting in the quiet, sterile space, suffocating under the weight of his own deception. He tried to use the law to force my submission. Instead, he handed me the exact lever I needed to pry their entire conspiracy wide open. The pressure on Vanessa would now become unbearable. She could no longer hide behind country club gossip or fake tears. She was facing a hard legal deadline. I knew her behavioral patterns perfectly. When confronted with an inescapable trap, she would not surrender. She would panic and attempt a reckless escalation to maintain her victim status. She would stage a tragedy to avoid the medical exam, and I was waiting for her to make that exact mistake. The 14-day legal deadline was a ticking time bomb resting directly under my sister's carefully constructed life. I knew Vanessa did not possess the stamina to endure a drawn-out judicial battle. She thrived on instant gratification and quick emotional manipulation. When confronted with a rigid court mandate requiring actual biological proof, her fragile victim persona fractured. She needed a drastic exit strategy to avoid the impending medical examination. She chose the annual summer regatta luncheon at the Annapolis Yacht Club as her stage. I was sitting at my laboratory desk in Baltimore when the digital shockwave hit. My paralegal contact, Sarah, forwarded a video file to my secure encrypted messaging application. Someone in the dining room had recorded the entire incident on a smartphone, and the footage was spreading rapidly through our social circles. I opened the video file and expanded it across my high-resolution monitor. The footage showed the sunlit dining room crowded with wealthy patrons wearing pastel linen and expensive nautical watches. Vanessa was standing near the center tables, surrounded by the wives of prominent shipping executives. She wore a pristine white summer dress, holding a crystal water goblet. In the video, she suddenly grabbed the edge of a mahogany chair. She let out a sharp, theatrical gasp that silenced the room. Then she collapsed, sinking to the hardwood floor with a slow, dramatic grace that prevented any actual physical injury. The surrounding women shrieked and rushed to her side. The camera lens zoomed in, capturing the chaos. Grayson knelt beside her, looking genuinely terrified. My father pushed through the crowd, shouting for someone to call for an ambulance. Vanessa lay on the floor, clutching her stomach. She wept loudly, blaming the severe distress of the recent divorce filings. She wailed that the relentless legal harassment from her cruel sister was destroying her body. She cried out that she was losing the baby. I paused the video feed. I magnified the image, focusing on my sister's face. A sympathetic socialite handed Vanessa a tissue. Vanessa took it and dabbed at her eyes. But she did not crush the paper. She held a perfectly pristine, unwrinkled tissue, pressing it delicately against her cheek to preserve her expensive makeup. A woman suffering a sudden traumatic medical emergency does not worry about smudging her foundation. Her grief was entirely performative. It was a calculated theatrical production designed to manipulate a room full of gullible elites. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed my father's private cell phone number. I answered the call, keeping my breathing slow and steady. Richard did not offer a greeting. His voice was a harsh, guttural snarl, vibrating with pure, unadulterated rage. He informed me that Vanessa was currently resting in a private hospital wing under heavy sedation. He told me she suffered a stress-induced miscarriage. "You killed your own niece," Richard said. His words were sharp, intended to inflict maximum psychological damage. You could not let Grayson go. You had to drag your sister into a vicious legal dispute over petty alimony. You harassed her until her body gave out. You are a monster, Beatrix. I listened to the steady hum of my laboratory air filters. I did not attempt to defend myself. I knew arguing with a man blinded by his own performative vanity was a waste of breath. "You are no longer a part of this family," my father continued, his voice dropping to a lethal register. "I am freezing every account associated with your name. I am calling the managing partners at your forensic firm this afternoon. I sit on the board of 3 major banks that fund their commercial operations. I will withdraw every single line of credit unless they terminate your employment by Friday. You will have nothing left." He ended the call without waiting for a response. The line went dead, leaving a heavy, hollow tone in my ear. The social execution was swift and total. Within hours, my name became a curse word among the Maryland waterfront elite. I was publicly villainized, cast as the jealous, vindictive wife who drove her innocent pregnant sister into a tragic crisis. I was entirely isolated. Grayson blocked my number. My former friends from the country club deleted my contact information. My father marshaled his immense corporate influence, attempting to destroy my professional reputation. I walked down the hall and entered the office of Thomas, our senior legal counsel. I informed him about the incoming phone call from my father and the threat to our corporate credit lines. Thomas leaned back in his leather chair, tapping his silver pen against his desk. He was a veteran of federal fraud trials. He despised men who used inherited wealth to bully legitimate businesses. Thomas assured me my position was secure. He told me our firm operated on federal government contracts and did not rely on local Maryland banks. My father possessed zero actual leverage in my professional domain. My fortress was secure. Anyone else would have shattered under the crushing weight of that sudden social isolation. But I felt a profound, cold clarity settle over my mind. I anticipated this exact sequence of events. I returned to my workstation and walked over to my secure, fireproof safe. I entered the numeric code and retrieved the heavy sealed envelope containing my mother's final letter. I spread the yellowed pages across the stainless steel surface. Evelyn George was a quiet, observant woman who spent her life watching her youngest daughter manipulate the world. I scanned the dark navy blue ink, searching for a specific paragraph located near the bottom of the second page. I found the passage. My mother documented the conclusion of Vanessa's teenage extortion scheme. 10 years ago, Vanessa used a forged clinical diagnosis to trap a wealthy high school boyfriend. When the boy's parents grew suspicious and demanded an independent medical confirmation from their own family doctor, Vanessa panicked. She realized she was trapped. Evelyn wrote down exactly how her daughter escaped the corner. Vanessa waited until the boy came to visit her at our estate. She stood at the top of the grand sweeping staircase. She orchestrated a fake argument, crying hysterically about the pressure they were putting on her. Then she intentionally threw herself down the carpeted stairs, ensuring she landed on a soft, decorative rug. She claimed the traumatic fall caused a spontaneous miscarriage, preventing any future medical verification. The predictability of her pathology was her greatest weakness. Vanessa possessed no original tactics. When confronted with a demand for physical proof, she always resorted to the exact same theatrical exit strategy. She played the grieving mother to erase the required evidence. I sat in my quiet laboratory, staring at the 10-year-old handwritten warning. My mother reached across a decade to hand me the ultimate playbook. I knew Vanessa was faking the collapse at the yacht club because she had executed the identical routine a decade earlier. Her desperate pivot was not a surprise. It was a structural requirement of her ongoing fraud. I allowed the town of Annapolis to hate me. I embraced my role as the villain in their shallow gossip circles. I let my father threaten my career, and I let Grayson play the tragic, grieving father. Their arrogant certainty provided the perfect cover for my final maneuver. They believed the fabricated miscarriage ended the legal dispute. With the supposed baby gone, Grayson could withdraw his demand for alimony and quietly dismiss the divorce proceedings without submitting to the medical examination. They thought they had successfully swept the entire scandal under the rug, preserving the pristine George family reputation. But a crime had already been committed, and erasing the fictional child did not erase the fraudulent paperwork. Vanessa had already submitted the fake stock photo ultrasound and the forged obstetrician note to the attorneys managing the family trust. She had already requested an emergency cash disbursement using the United States postal system. I opened a new secure encrypted file on my computer desktop. I began compiling the final pieces of my dossier. I digitized the high-resolution scans of the forged medical notes. I attached the metadata reports proving the origin of the $12 stock photo. I included a certified digital copy of my mother's sworn affidavit detailing the historical baseline of the forgery techniques. My father thought he controlled the entire board. He thought his threats could silence anyone in Maryland. But the George Family Trust was not an unregulated personal piggy bank. It was a massive financial entity subject to strict federal oversight. The accounts were monitored by a national independent accounting firm located in Chicago. Those auditors cared nothing about yacht club memberships or local social standing. They cared exclusively about federal compliance and wire fraud regulations. I finished organizing the digital evidence packets. I was preparing to bypass my father, my husband, and the local attorneys entirely. I was going to drop this devastating forensic package directly onto the desks of the independent financial auditors. My sister wanted to play a high-stakes game with corporate trust funds. I was about to introduce her to the federal authorities. The quiet phase of my investigation was over. It was time to initiate the audit. The Annapolis social scene rallied around my sister with predictable swiftness. Following her theatrical collapse at the yacht club luncheon, the local elite transformed Vanessa into a tragic martyr. Black town cars lined the circular driveway of the George family estate, delivering expensive floral arrangements and catered meals. The wives of prominent shipping executives left tearful voicemails offering their profound condolences. My father played the role of the solemn, grieving patriarch, canceling his golf tournaments to stand vigil by her side. Grayson stayed home from the corporate office, playing the part of the devastated husband, mourning a child that never existed. They thought the drama was over. They believed the fabricated medical crisis provided the perfect excuse to dismiss the divorce litigation without ever stepping inside a doctor's office. They assumed my request for physical verification was buried under a mountain of carefully curated social sympathy. But grief is merely a weapon in my sister's arsenal, and she never wields a weapon without demanding compensation. 3 days after the luncheon, my encrypted messaging application illuminated my dark laboratory. Sarah sent a digital alert from her desk at the law firm. I unlocked my screen and read the scrolling text. Vanessa was not just sitting in her bedroom accepting flower deliveries. She was actively exploiting her fictional trauma for immense financial gain. Sarah explained that Vanessa filed a formal claim with the George Family Trust administrators earlier that morning. She invoked a specific trauma and recovery clause buried deep within the estate charter. She cited severe emotional distress and requested an immediate, unconditional disbursement of $500,000. She claimed she needed the funds to seek private psychiatric treatment at an exclusive overseas facility to heal from the tragedy her cruel sister caused. It was a brilliant, breathtaking display of pure greed. She wanted to walk away from her failed extortion scheme carrying a fortune in untraceable cash. She knew my father would authorize the payout instantly, just to maintain the illusion of his perfect, fragile daughter. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the glowing monitor. I felt no anger. I felt the crisp, sharp satisfaction of a hunter watching a predator walk willingly into a steel trap. My sister was attempting to extract a six-figure sum from a highly regulated corporate entity using forged documents. She was elevating her domestic lie into a severe financial felony. The George Family Trust was a vast financial apparatus. It was managed locally by my father's obedient attorneys, but the actual capital was overseen by a national independent accounting firm located in Chicago. Those financial investigators did not attend Annapolis charity galas. They did not care about the George family maritime legacy or the local country club gossip. They cared exclusively about Securities and Exchange Commission regulations and federal compliance codes. I compiled the final digital dossier. I gathered the high-resolution scans of the forged obstetrician note and the fake diagnostic ultrasound. I attached the metadata extraction report proving the medical image was purchased from a commercial stock photography website for $12. I included a pristine digital copy of my mother's sworn affidavit detailing Vanessa's historical baseline of identical forgery techniques. I drafted a brief, sterile cover letter. I did not include any emotional domestic backstory. I presented the facts with clinical precision, citing the specific federal statutes regarding wire fraud and the illegal extraction of fiduciary funds using fabricated evidence. I addressed the email directly to the senior compliance officer at the Chicago auditing firm. I routed the message through a series of anonymous proxy servers to ensure the origin remained untraceable. I clicked send. The digital payload vanished into the ether. The quiet phase of my investigation was officially over. The corporate response was staggering in its efficiency. Federal financial institutions possess a zero-tolerance policy for suspected internal fraud. Within 48 hours, an automated compliance hold was placed on every single account associated with the George Family Trust. The Chicago firm initiated a mandatory independent fraud investigation, freezing all pending disbursements immediately. I received the real-time updates through my paralegal contact. Sarah sent a secure photograph taken from the doorway of my father's corner office. The image displayed a heavy piece of certified mail resting dead center on his polished mahogany desk. A bright red ink stamp bearing the word urgent dominated the top corner of the thick envelope. My father returned from his country club luncheon and opened that letter. According to Sarah, the ensuing rage shook the glass walls of the legal department. Richard assumed the financial freeze was a catastrophic bureaucratic glitch. He screamed at his local attorneys, demanding they call Chicago and fix the clerical error before his shipping vendors noticed the frozen accounts. He was a man accustomed to bullying his way out of every inconvenience. But the national auditors refused to yield. The Chicago compliance officer sent a formal response dictating the specific terms required to lift the financial embargo. The directive was simple and entirely lethal to my sister's future. To release the $500,000 and unfreeze the maritime capital, the auditors demanded the physical, original copies of Vanessa's medical records. Scanned attachments and digital photographs were no longer legally sufficient to clear the fraud inquiry. The independent accounting firm required Vanessa to surrender the actual paper ultrasound and the original handwritten doctor's note. They intended to subject the physical documents to an independent forensic authentication process. The pressure cooker was permanently sealed. I sat in my downtown Baltimore laboratory, listening to the steady hum of the climate control system. I mapped out the exact geometry of the trap closing around my sister. I knew why the demand for physical paper would destroy her. Vanessa was a reckless amateur. When she created the fake obstetrician note, she did not use specialized medical stationery. She traced the signature onto stolen, outdated hospital prescription pads she pocketed during a routine checkup years ago. The specific paper stock she utilized was discontinued by that medical network long before her fictional pregnancy began. A standard watermark test would expose the timeline discrepancy instantly. Furthermore, she executed the forgery using a common commercial ballpoint pen. Genuine medical facilities mandate the use of archival quality gel ink to ensure patient records survive long-term storage without fading. If an investigator placed her physical note under a stereo microscope, they would identify the chemical composition of the cheap ink within seconds. The physical indentation on the paper fibers would prove the signature was drawn slowly rather than written naturally. Vanessa could not hand over the originals because the physical chemistry of the paper would secure her a federal indictment. The pristine maritime reputation of the George dynasty was no longer threatened by local neighborhood gossip. They were now facing the silent, calculating scrutiny of federal financial investigators. My sister was backed into an impossible corner. She could not produce the documents without exposing her felony, but if she refused to surrender the paperwork, the Chicago auditors would keep the family trust permanently frozen. My father required that liquid capital to operate his shipping empire. He would turn his immense anger toward Vanessa, demanding she hand over the simple medical notes to save his business. The psychological weight inside that waterfront estate was turning toxic. Vanessa was trapped between a federal investigation and a father who prioritized his wealth over his children. She was running out of lies to tell, and Grayson was standing right beside her, watching the walls cave in. My husband was a coward, but he was not entirely stupid. The sudden involvement of national financial auditors, the frozen bank accounts, and Vanessa's mounting erratic panic were impossible to ignore. The blinders were beginning to slip from his eyes. He was finally starting to look closely at the woman he destroyed our marriage to protect. The foundation of his performative life was crumbling, and I knew it was only a matter of days before he stumbled onto the truth, all on his own. The financial freeze initiated by the Chicago auditors created a suffocating vacuum inside the George family estate. My father demanded immediate compliance, but the federal investigators remained unmoved. The shipping empire required liquid capital to process international customs fees and pay docking tariffs. Without access to the primary trust accounts, the logistics firm began to hemorrhage credibility across the eastern seaboard. Grayson was trapped in the exact center of this corporate collapse. He married into my family, expecting a lifetime of effortless luxury and guaranteed promotions. Instead, he found himself tethered to a sinking ship, taking on water faster than anyone could bail. Grayson built his entire identity on the approval of wealthy men. He grew up in a modest suburban neighborhood, watching his parents struggle with mounting credit card debt. He equated financial security with moral superiority. When he secured his vice president title at my father's firm, he thought he had finally outrun his working-class origins. But the frozen bank accounts triggered a primal fear inside his chest. He started looking for a lifeline. And when a coward searches for an exit, they finally open their eyes to the reality surrounding them. The local attorneys informed my father that lifting the financial embargo required Vanessa's original medical records. Richard turned his furious attention toward his youngest daughter, demanding she surrender the physical paperwork immediately. Vanessa responded by fleeing the house. She claimed her grief was too overwhelming to deal with administrative chores. Grayson decided to follow her. He expected to find a grieving mother seeking solace at a private wellness clinic, or perhaps walking quietly along a secluded beach. Instead, he tracked her luxury coupe to a high-end harbor bar located on the bustling edge of the marina. Grayson sat in his parked car watching through the tinted windows. He saw Vanessa sitting on a velvet bar stool near the open patio. She was not crying. She was laughing, loudly, flirting with a wealthy yachtsman and tossing back consecutive shots of premium tequila. She wore a tight red cocktail dress, abandoning the modest floral maternity outfits she paraded around the country club just a week prior. The tragic victim persona was gone. She was celebrating her anticipated payout, unbothered by the supposed loss of a child or the impending federal scrutiny. Grayson realized the narrative was unraveling before his eyes. He needed physical proof to understand the scope of the disaster. When Vanessa left the bar with her new companion, Grayson drove directly to her luxury condominium in downtown Annapolis. My father paid the lease on the building, and Grayson retained a spare emergency key from his days managing the family real estate properties. He entered the quiet, pristine apartment. He bypassed the designer clothing draped over the furniture and the expensive jewelry scattered across the vanity. He focused entirely on her home office. He opened the sleek glass desk, looking for the medical files Richard so desperately needed to save the company. He did not find a legitimate hospital folder. He found a scattered pile of stolen prescription pads buried under a stack of imported fashion magazines. He found the practice sheets. Grayson stared at the blue ink, seeing the repeated attempts to mimic a prominent obstetrician's signature. He saw the harsh, jagged lines, the unnatural loops, and the crossed-out mistakes. He was present in the boardroom when the final fraudulent note was submitted. He recognized the forgery instantly. In that quiet condominium, the magnitude of his catastrophic failure finally crushed him. He threw away his marriage, his reputation, and his corporate future to protect a sociopathic deception. He backed the wrong sister. It was midnight when the heavy knocking echoed through my Baltimore apartment. I was sitting at my kitchen counter reviewing the final digital evidence files for my upcoming maneuver. I walked to the front door and looked through the security peephole. Grayson stood in the dim hallway. His custom suit jacket was wrinkled and stained. His silk tie was pulled loose, hanging unevenly around his neck. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door a few inches. Grayson immediately reached out, grabbing the wooden doorframe to support his own weight. His hands were frantic and slick with nervous sweat, leaving dark smudges on the crisp white paint. The heavy scent of stale scotch and bitter regret rolled off his breath, filling the narrow entryway. "Beatrix," he gasped, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. "You have to let me in. Please. You were right. You were right about everything." I did not step aside. I stood in the doorway looking at the man I once vowed to spend my life with. There was no triumph in my chest. There was no urge to shout or gloat over his misery. I felt a profound, clinical disgust. I analyzed him the same way I analyzed a poorly executed forgery under a microscope. He was a weak imitation of a partner. "She lied to me, Beatrix," he sobbed, tears spilling down his pale face. "I went to her apartment tonight. I found the papers hidden in her desk. She faked the entire thing. She faked the pregnancy and the miscarriage. She manipulated me. She used my fear of your father to blind me. We can fix this together. I will go to the board and tell them the truth. I will testify against her in front of the auditors. Just please, come back to me." I watched him weep. He was offering to destroy Vanessa only because she could no longer offer him corporate protection. He was trying to crawl back to my side because I was the only person left who possessed a stable income and a clear path out of the wreckage. "You were not manipulated, Grayson," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "You made a calculated business decision. You weighed the value of our marriage against the value of your country club membership, and you chose the golf course." But she lied. He pleaded, his grip tightening on the wooden frame. "She tricked all of us." "Her lie was merely a temporary inconvenience," I replied, staring directly into his bloodshot eyes. but your cowardice is a permanent condition. A forensic examiner can expose a forged document in an afternoon. There is no science on earth that can fix a man who lacks a spine. I turned around and walked to the kitchen island. I picked up a crisp manila folder containing the documents Thomas drafted earlier that week. I brought the folder back to the doorway and pressed it against his sweaty chest, forcing him to let go of the doorframe just to catch it. "These are the final divorce papers," I told him. "My legal counsel drafted a new settlement. I am not paying you a single cent in alimony, and there is no non-disclosure agreement to hide behind. You will sign them by tomorrow morning, or I will let the federal auditors know you were an active participant in an attempted corporate extortion scheme." Grayson stared at the folder, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish pulled from the harbor. He had nothing left to leverage. He was thoroughly defeated, stripped of his false confidence and his borrowed wealth. I did not wait for a response or another tearful apology. I shut the heavy wooden door, the deadbolt sliding into place with a sharp, definitive click. The emotional ties were officially severed. The marital betrayer was neutralized, but the primary architect of my humiliation remained untouched. Vanessa still believed she could outsmart the financial investigators. She still planned to attend the grandest social event of the season, playing the role of the brave survivor. She assumed I was hiding in Baltimore nursing a broken heart. She had no idea I was tailoring a new dress, preparing to deliver the undeniable truth to the exact audience she valued most. 3 months passed since the night I handed Grayson his final divorce papers and shut the door to my apartment. 90 days of silence. During that time, the federal audit initiated by the Chicago accounting firm dragged on, freezing the lifeblood of my father's shipping empire. The public knew nothing about the frozen trust accounts or the missing medical records. To the outside world, the George family remained a flawless institution. October arrived, bringing a crisp chill to the coastal air and signaling the start of the Autumn Commodore's Ball. This event served as the crown jewel of the Maryland Maritime social calendar. It was an exclusive gathering designed to celebrate wealth lineage and the illusion of perfect control. This year, the ball held special significance. My father, Richard, was being honored for his 10-year tenure on the Yacht Club Board of Directors. The ballroom underwent a stunning seasonal transformation. Deep burgundy velvet drapes hung from the tall windows. Elaborate gold leaf centerpieces decorated the tables, sitting beside crystal vases filled with white orchids. The air smelled of roasted pheasant, expensive bourbon, and imported perfume. It was a night engineered exclusively to celebrate his pristine legacy. I knew Vanessa would attend. She purchased a custom emerald silk gown weeks in advance, ensuring she would be the center of visual attention. For the past 90 days, she played the role of the brave, tragic survivor. She soaked up the pity of the local elite like dry earth absorbing a heavy rain. She paraded her fabricated grief through every high-end boutique and charity luncheon in Annapolis. She assumed the storm had passed. She thought my quiet retreat to Baltimore meant I accepted defeat. She mistook my strategic patience for surrender. She did not realize I spent those 90 days building a guillotine made of paper. I did not waste a single hour mourning my marriage. I finalized the divorce paperwork, securing my legal and financial freedom from Grayson. I compiled the digital metadata, the historical handwriting samples, and the modern forged documents into a single, undeniable narrative. The evidence was pristine. Now it was time to deliver the final presentation to the exact audience that enabled her deception. I drove to the yacht club in my 10-year-old sedan. I bypassed the valet service and parked the vehicle right next to a line of idling luxury town cars. I stepped out into the crisp October evening. I chose my attire with forensic precision. I did not wear a delicate evening gown or pastel silk. I wore a tailored black evening suit. The cut was sharp, featuring rigid shoulders and stark, clean lines. I wore zero jewelry. I carried no evening clutch. My only accessory was a sleek, leather-bound portfolio resting securely against my side. I approached the heavy brass doors of the venue. The club manager stood near the entrance, holding a velvet rope. He recognized me instantly. His polite customer service smile fractured, replaced by a look of sheer panic. He knew I was a social pariah, an exiled daughter forbidden from attending family functions. But he lacked the authority to physically restrain a member of the George dynasty. I bypassed the velvet rope without breaking my stride. I stepped onto the polished hardwood floor of the grand ballroom. The string quartet was playing a lively classical piece, filling the high-ceilinged space with bright, energetic music. 300 shipping magnates, local politicians, and wealthy socialites mingled under the crystal chandeliers. They were a crowd obsessed with maintaining a flawless facade. In my eyes, they resembled a poorly constructed forgery, trying too hard to look authentic. My stiletto heels made a sharp, rhythmic click against the wood. Click, click, click. The sound was distinct, cutting through the low hum of polite conversation like a metronome. The people nearest the entrance turned to look. Their eyes widened in shock. The whispers ignited instantly, spreading across the room like a sudden draft catching a spark. The disgraced sister, the cruel wife who supposedly harassed her sibling into a medical crisis, had returned uninvited. I did not lower my gaze. I did not offer a defensive smile. I walked straight toward the center of the ballroom, radiating a cold, terrifying confidence. The crowd parted instinctively, stepping back to create a wide path. They expected to see a broken woman seeking desperate redemption. Instead, they saw a forensic examiner walking into a courtroom ready to present exhibits. My calm demeanor paralyzed their gossip, forcing the room into a hushed, nervous silence. My father stood at the main VIP table, situated on a raised dais overlooking the dance floor. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch, surrounded by key corporate board members and prominent investors. He noticed the sudden shift in the crowd. He looked up and saw me walking down the center aisle. His distinguished patriarch mask cracked. A brief, visceral flash of genuine terror crossed his face. He recognized the leather portfolio in my hand. He knew the financial freeze was unresolved, and he realized I held the missing pieces. Richard immediately raised his free hand, signaling the 2 private security guards stationed near the towering ice sculpture. The men in dark suits moved to intercept me. They flanked my path, raising their hands to block my progression before I could reach the raised dais. "My man, you are not on the guest list for this evening," the taller guard said. His tone was firm, attempting to intimidate me into a quiet retreat. I did not stop walking. I did not raise my voice or cause a physical struggle. I looked the guard directly in the eyes with unflinching clinical authority. "I am Richard George's eldest daughter," I said, keeping my pace steady and even. "If you lay a hand on me in front of these 300 maritime investors, I promise the ensuing lawsuit will cost you your security license before midnight. Step aside." The guard hesitated, glancing toward my father for confirmation. In that single second of doubt, I smoothly sidestepped his outstretched arm. I ascended the 3 short steps to the main VIP table. The string quartet faltered on the stage, a cellist missing a note and plunging the entire ballroom into a suffocating quiet. Every eye in the building locked onto the dais. The tension in the air felt heavy and metallic. Vanessa sat in a velvet chair next to my father. She wore the emerald gown, her hair styled in perfect, loose waves. As I approached the table, the color drained entirely from her cheeks, leaving her skin a sickly pale hue. It was not her usual performative fragility. It was the raw, undeniable fear of a cornered predator realizing the trap had finally snapped shut. I stopped at the edge of the white linen tablecloth. I placed the leather portfolio onto the table. The soft thud echoed in the silent room. I looked at the prominent board members, the politicians and the shipping executives seated around the perimeter. Then I looked at my father. "Good evening, Richard," I said. My voice was loud, crisp, and perfectly calm. It carried to the furthest corners of the ballroom without requiring a microphone. "I wanted to come down here in person to congratulate you on your remarkable tenure. You built an incredible maritime legacy. You possess a pristine, immaculate reputation in this town." My father stared at me, a muscle feathering rapidly in his jaw. "Beatrix," he hissed under his breath, leaning forward, "leave this room immediately. Do not do this here." I ignored his command. It is truly inspiring to witness how far you will go to protect that reputation. I continued ensuring the front row of tables heard every single syllable. You will sacrifice a marriage. You will bury a federal inquiry. You will freeze your own corporate trust funds just to keep the surface of the water looking smooth for your friends. The investors seated around the table shifted uncomfortably. They heard the phrase federal inquiry. Their financial instincts flared, overriding their social decorum. The domestic drama was rapidly merging with their corporate reality. I turned my head slowly, locking my gaze onto my sister. The layers of conflict, social, familial, and corporate, were all converging in the exact center of the world that valued them most. "And Vanessa," I said, letting a soft, chilling smile touch my lips, "you look wonderful tonight. Recovery suits you." It is a modern medical miracle how quickly the human body can bounce back from a tragedy that never actually happened. A collective intake of breath swept through the ballroom. The polite facade of the Annapolis elite shattered in an instant. Vanessa gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. She opened her mouth to speak, to deploy her tears to cry out for sympathy. But I did not give her the space to perform. I tapped the leather portfolio resting on the tablecloth, holding the undeniable proof of her felony. The ballroom held its collective breath, anticipating a theatrical screaming match. The gathered socialites wanted a vulgar spectacle. They expected me to shatter the crystal centerpieces and hurl accusations across the white linen. I refused to provide them with cheap entertainment. My professional nature dictates a different protocol. I deal exclusively in verified exhibits, not public hysterics. I shifted my focus away from my sister. I addressed the 5 elderly men seated adjacent to my father. These individuals constituted the senior steering committee for the George family estate. They held the actual fiduciary power. They were the specific targets currently enduring the intense scrutiny of the Chicago financial investigators. "Gentlemen," I said, keeping my tone clinically detached, "we can review the impending federal indictments regarding your frozen capital out here in front of the catering staff, or we can relocate this discussion to the private oak-paneled boardroom down the hall. The decision belongs to you." I picked up my leather dossier. I turned my back on the stunned crowd and walked toward the discreet VIP corridor. I did not check over my shoulder. I knew they would follow my lead. Men who spend their lives guarding inherited fortunes always follow the person holding the match to their paper empires. A minute later, the heavy soundproof doors of the private committee room clicked shut. The ambient noise of the gala vanished entirely. The atmosphere inside the intimate space felt instantly suffocating and dense. A polished oval table dominated the floor. I took the seat at the far end, assuming the position of the presiding examiner. My father stormed into the room. His face flushed a dark, dangerous red. Vanessa trailed close behind his shoulder, gripping his tuxedo sleeve. She looked like a trapped animal searching for a window to break. The 5 trust directors filed in, taking their seats with grim, cautious expressions. They recognized a severe corporate threat, and their loyalty to my father was rapidly fading under the shadow of a federal audit. "This is a profound outrage," Richard snarled, slamming his palms onto the table. "You will hand over whatever garbage you brought in that folder, Beatrix, and then you will leave this property." I did not flinch. I unzipped the leather binding of my portfolio. I retrieved 6 pristine, bound copies of my forensic findings. I slid 1 crisp folder to each of the trust directors. I pushed the final copy toward my father. I intentionally left Vanessa empty-handed. She was no longer a participant in this negotiation. She was merely the subject of the inquiry. "You are currently locked in a mandatory financial embargo," I stated, watching the directors open the covers. "The Chicago firm froze your assets because someone attempted to extract $500,000 using fabricated medical claims. You assumed it was a bureaucratic glitch. It is not a glitch. It is a documented felony." I watched the directors turn the first page. Their eyes scanned the high-resolution photographs of the forged obstetrician note and the fake diagnostic ultrasound. I included the metadata extraction reports detailing the commercial stock photo purchase. I provided the specific chemical breakdown of the cheap ballpoint ink used on the stolen hospital prescription pads. Vanessa let out a sharp, frantic gasp. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the open folder from my father's hands. "It is a lie," she stammered, her voice cracking. "Beatrix manufactured those images. She works in a crime lab. She knows how to manipulate digital files. She is trying to frame me because her husband chose me over her." Her defense was pathetic. She was trying to weaponize domestic jealousy against hard forensic science. The directors did not look up from the pages. They were calculating the legal exposure. I reached into the interior pocket of my portfolio. I retrieved the original 10-year-old envelope I found hidden inside my childhood cedar desk. The yellowed parchment felt fragile against my fingertips. I placed the envelope flat on the polished wood. I pushed it forward. The heavy, suffocating silence in the room amplified the subtle, dry whisper of the paper sliding across the smooth mahogany surface. The envelope stopped directly in front of my father. "Digital files can be manipulated," I agreed, maintaining my steady cadence, "but historical physical artifacts possess an unalterable pedigree." That envelope belonged to my mother. She hid it inside my bedroom desk a decade ago. Richard stared at the distinct navy blue handwriting on the front of the aged paper. He recognized Evelyn's fluid cursive script instantly. The angry flush drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and ancient. His hands trembled as he reached out to touch the familiar ink. I pulled a digital projector remote from my pocket. I clicked the activation button. A bright beam of light illuminated the blank presentation screen mounted on the back wall of the committee room. I displayed a high-definition scanned copy of the document hidden inside that envelope. "This is not a simple diary entry," I explained, projecting my voice to command the quiet room. My mother was a deeply observant woman. She watched Vanessa deploy these exact deceptive tactics during high school. She recognized the severe psychological pathology early on. "Evelyn knew you would always choose to protect the family image over addressing the bitter truth, Richard, so she took preemptive measures." The image on the screen displayed a formal legal document. It featured a rigid type structure accompanied by a vibrant red notary seal stamped near the bottom margin. The month before she suffered her fatal aneurysm, Evelyn visited an independent civil attorney outside of this county, I revealed. She drafted a sworn, witnessed, and notarized affidavit. She documented Vanessa's entire history of pathological lying, forgery, and teenage extortion. She outlined the specific physical habits Vanessa uses when faking a signature. My father opened the physical envelope. He pulled out the original crisp pages. He read his late wife's words. I watched his eyes track across the paragraphs. Evelyn detailed the fake blood disease scam Vanessa used to manipulate a wealthy boy. She described the stolen hospital letterhead and the traced doctor's signatures. She described the fake staircase fall Vanessa orchestrated to erase the need for physical proof. The blueprint for the current fraud was written in undeniable ink 10 years before it happened. But the forensic baseline was only the preamble. The unexpected payoff rested in the final paragraph of the notarized document. I clicked the remote advancing the projection to highlight the last section of the affidavit. Evelyn did not just leave a warning, I said. She built a legal failsafe to protect me from both of you. The trust directors leaned forward, reading the illuminated text. The legal language was ironclad. Evelyn mandated that if Vanessa ever attempted to defraud the George family estate or maliciously harm another designated heir, this specific affidavit must be utilized to permanently sever Vanessa from the trust structure. Evelyn invoked a little-known morality and fraud clause embedded in the original founding charter of the shipping empire. Richard finished reading the physical page. He dropped the paper onto the table like it was burning his fingers. He looked at the red notary seal. He realized his beloved deceased wife knew exactly how dangerous his favorite daughter truly was. Evelyn understood that Vanessa's greed would eventually threaten the entire family legacy. She left the ultimate weapon hidden in the dark, waiting for the day I needed to defend myself. Vanessa stared at the glowing screen. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She could not claim this document was a digital fabrication. The physical paper was sitting right in front of her, bearing a decade-old certified legal stamp and the undisputed signature of our dead mother. Her usual theatrical tears were useless against a notarized mandate. The trust directors exchanged grim, calculating glances. The dynamic in the room shifted entirely. They were no longer indulging a domestic squabble. They were holding a legal directive that required immediate fiduciary action. If they ignored Evelyn's sworn affidavit and allowed Vanessa to remain a beneficiary, they would become personally liable for the ongoing federal wire fraud. They would be indicted as co-conspirators by the Chicago auditing firm. "This is the reality of your situation," I told the 5 men at the table. "You are holding verified proof of an ongoing felony extortion scheme alongside a binding legal mandate to expel the perpetrator from your financial ecosystem. The federal investigators are waiting for your response." I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to threaten them. The cold, unyielding machinery of the legal and financial system was now fully engaged. The trap was locked. I set the stage flawlessly, preparing to execute the final forensic breakdown. The board had no choice but to follow the evidence, setting up the ultimate unmasking of my sister and the permanent destruction of her performative life. I pick up the sleek digital controller and step toward the center of the dark oak table. The ambient lighting in the private committee room dims automatically as the projection screen descends from the ceiling molding. A bright geometric beam of light cuts through the shadow, illuminating the minute dust motes drifting through the cool air. The 5 senior directors of the George Family Trust lean forward in unison, their identical tortoiseshell reading spectacles catching the cool sapphire reflection of the display lens. My father sits perfectly rigid at the head of the oval table, his fingers dug so deeply into the padded leather armrests that the skin over his knuckles resembles stretched parchment. Vanessa perches immediately to his right, her breathing rapid and shallow. The expensive emerald silk of her evening gown rustles loudly against the woodwork with every panicked inhalation, a stark sonic contrast to the heavy, suffocating quiet that has settled over the room. Let us evaluate the empirical mechanics of the documentation I state, adjusting the focus dial on the presentation unit. On the left section of the display, I project a high-resolution microscopic scan of the signature extracted from the recent obstetrician note Vanessa submitted to secure the $500,000 emergency trauma stipend. On the right panel, I display the verified baseline penmanship samples our mother secretly cataloged in the hidden cedar drawer a decade ago. The specific visual exhibit that now dominates the wall constitutes the definitive turning point of this entire inquiry. Under 80 times magnification, the ink tells a story that the human eye cannot detect beneath the glittering chandeliers of a country club ballroom. I trace the laser pointer along the cursive terminal stroke of the forged signature. When an individual signs their own name naturally, the physiological movement is entirely fluid, governed by decades of deeply ingrained neuromuscular memory. The writing instrument glides across the paper fibers, creating fine, tapered edges and predictable variations in ink density, where the hand naturally accelerates through familiar curves. But when a person attempts to trace a signature, when they carefully draw shapes over a light source to mimic an authentic mark, their hand moves at an unnaturally slow, deliberate velocity. The brain continually monitors the alignment, resulting in microscopic hesitation marks. I point the tracking beam at a dense pool of dark ink, resting precisely at the apex of the cursive loop. "Look at this localized ink pooling," I instruct the board members, keeping my voice low, flat, and entirely conversational. The author stopped the movement of the ballpoint pen in the middle of a continuous stroke. A genuine medical professional scribbling a rapid diagnostic recommendation on a busy hospital floor never anchors their pen in the center of a simple vowel. This jagged, irregular edge is the undeniable biometric profile of a slow tracing technique. Someone placed an authentic signature over a glowing light table and copied the outline onto a blank prescription pad. Vanessa grips the edge of the mahogany table, her manicured fingertips pressing so hard against the wood grain that her perfect lacquer polish threatens to chip. "This is a ridiculous technical performance," she cuts in her voice, rising to a shrill, desperate register as she attempts to deploy her usual emotional weaponry. Beatrix is inflating standard handwriting variations into a criminal indictment. You cannot trust her clinical interpretation. She has been vindictive and unstable ever since Grayson left her house. She manufactured these microscopic images in her laboratory just to humiliate me. I do not offer a verbal counter to her outburst. I do not raise my voice or engage in a domestic argument. I simply click the controller, advancing the presentation to the subsequent slide to introduce the structural handwriting alignment. The software displays a digital overlay of the lowercase letter G extracted from both documents. Every human hand possesses an unalterable motor print, I explain, watching the directors study the geometric lines. 10 years ago, Evelyn George documented the precise idiosyncratic quirks unique to Vanessa's penmanship. When Vanessa forms a lowercase g, she consistently initiates the circular loop at the 2 o'clock position, drags the descending tail downward at a sharp, rigid vertical angle rather than a smooth, natural curve, and terminates the loop with a harsh horizontal strike. The 2 digital line vectors merge on the screen, creating a single, perfect alignment. The mathematical probability of 2 separate individuals producing this exact structural match is less than 1 in 10 million. The person who forged the obstetrician signature is sitting right here in this emerald dress. My sister did not merely execute a domestic deception. She left her unique physiological signature on a document used to extract money from a regulated financial entity. The room falls into a dense, heavy stillness. One of the senior trust directors, Arthur Vance, pulls his chair back several inches. Arthur has spent 30 years maintaining an immaculate reputation in maritime corporate law, and he possesses a zero-tolerance policy for regulatory exposure. He shifts his gaze entirely away from my father, looking down at his printed copy of the forensic dossier. He pulls out his secure mobile phone and begins typing a frantic message to his firm's managing partners. He realizes that this domestic drama has officially crossed the threshold into a federal wire fraud investigation, and he is already calculating how to distance his own name from the impending fallout. But the handwriting analysis is merely the initial phase of the execution. I continue switching the presentation to the digital file architecture. Let us examine the visual proof that accompanied the financial request. I project the file metadata extracted from the black and white diagnostic ultrasound Vanessa submitted to the estate lawyers. The screen displays the inner source code of the image file. I highlight the commercial licensing watermark embedded deep within the digital layers. This fetal image did not originate from a regional hospital network. This graphic artifact was downloaded from a global stock photography library exactly 72 hours before the Yacht Club charity gala. The purchase log shows the file transaction was processed using an untraceable digital credit card. The total cost to fabricate the George family heir was $12. Vanessa stands up abruptly, the heavy wooden chair legs scraping harshly against the hardwood floorboards. The performative maternal grief she cultivated for the past 3 months evaporates instantly, replaced by the raw, pale sheen of genuine terror. "Daddy, please make her stop," she screams, grabbing my father's shoulder, her fingers trembling against his Navy Club jacket. "She is destroying our family legacy. Call the security guards back into the room. Use your corporate influence to suppress this file. You know I am the one who needs protection here." She attempts to weep, letting out a series of hollow, dry sobs. But the theatrical performance completely fails to register with the audience. The 5 trust directors remain entirely rigid, their eyes fixed on the $12 stock photo receipt projected on the wall. They are wealthy men who worship asset protection and compliance codes. They have no intention of safeguarding a reckless amateur when a federal prison sentence is on the table. They realize that if they authorize the $500,000 payout, they will be legally categorized as active co-conspirators in a financial felony. The firm's senior compliance manager closes his file folder with a sharp, definitive snap that echoes through the quiet boardroom. "Richard, we are instituting an immediate permanent freeze on all funds allocated to Vanessa, he states, his voice carrying an icy professional weight that cuts through my sister's weeping. The trust will not disperse a single dollar for this recovery stipend. Furthermore, we are formally withdrawing the family defense team from Grayson's divorce proceedings. This dossier contains clear evidence of mail fraud and wire fraud across state lines. If the national auditors forward these findings to the authorities, this board will cooperate fully to insulate the shipping empire from criminal liability. Vanessa drops back into her chair, her eyes wide with total astonishment as her entire social and financial support system vanishes in a matter of minutes. The country club sympathy she weaponized to exile me has become entirely useless against the unyielding weight of empirical data. I look at my father. Richard remains perfectly motionless, staring down at the physical envelope my mother left behind. He reads the notarized signature of Evelyn, the one person whose judgment he could never bully or contradict. He looks at the stock photo receipt on the wall, calculating the total destruction of his public legacy if this forensic report reaches the Baltimore business journals. He spent his entire career molding his surname into a monument of high society prestige. Now he faces the absolute documented truth of his late wife's warnings and the reality that his favorite child is a severe corporate liability. Richard slowly lifts his head. He does not look at me. He turns his torso entirely away from Vanessa, deliberately breaking the protective alignment he maintained since the charity gala. He pushes his chair back, creating a physical gap between himself and his youngest daughter. "You are on your own, Vanessa," my father says, his voice a low, hollow rasp that carries zero paternal warmth. "Do not ask me for lawyers. Do not return to the waterfront estate. You have disgraced your mother's memory, and you have compromised the safety of the shipping fleet. I am finished paying for your deceptions." The familial betrayal is resolved not with an emotional reconciliation, but with a clinical execution of justice. The narrative has completely shifted. Vanessa sits isolated in the center of the oak-paneled committee room, stripped of her narrative, her funding, and her social immunity. The trap has closed permanently around her, leaving her permanently cast out of the very social standing she tried to steal. I stand up slowly, gathering the original affidavit and sliding it securely back into my leather portfolio. I look at the trust directors who are already busy drafting the formal corporate exclusion orders to protect their own assets. The primary target has been neutralized, her performative life shattered beyond repair by the simple, undeniable truth of her own handwriting. But as I walk toward the exit, the heavy boardroom door swings open, revealing a frantic assistant holding a mobile device. She looks directly at my father, her face pale. "Sir, we have an emergency in the lobby. Grayson has just been confronted by the yacht club security team regarding a separate financial discrepancy in the corporate accounts. The collapse of Vanessa's lie is already triggering the next catastrophic failure in their empire. The marital betrayer is about to face the full legal consequence of his cowardice, and the true scope of the corporate ruin is about to spill out into the open ballroom." The incident in the lobby of the yacht club accelerated the inevitable destruction of my former husband. When the frantic assistant interrupted our private committee meeting, she delivered the final blow to Grayson's corporate facade. Grayson had assumed the upcoming divorce settlement would provide him with enough liquid capital to cover his mounting legal expenses. But retaining a prestigious litigator required a staggering upfront financial retainer. With his personal accounts draining rapidly, Grayson made a fatal error in judgment. He utilized his executive access to divert funds from a secondary corporate maritime account to pay his attorney. He believed he could replace the capital once the alimony payments commenced. He never anticipated the Chicago accounting firm freezing the entire financial network. The independent auditors flagged the unauthorized transfer during their deep diagnostic sweep of the George family ledger. My father did not hesitate or offer any paternal grace. Richard treated embezzlement as an unforgivable sin against his shipping empire. He marched out of the oak-paneled boardroom and confronted Grayson in the grand lobby. He fired him for cause in front of the catering staff, the valet attendants, and half a dozen prominent investors. By terminating him for gross financial misconduct, Richard legally voided Grayson's executive severance package. Grayson walked out of the Autumn Commodores Ball with no wife, no job, and zero corporate protection. The man who sacrificed his marriage to secure his country club membership lost everything in a single evening. The fallout descending upon my sister was equally swift and infinitely more brutal. The Maryland waterfront elite operate according to a ruthless social calculus. They tolerate quiet indiscretions, but they actively punish public embarrassment. By the time the sun rose over the Severn River the following morning, the whispering networks had already processed the events of the gala. The narrative shifted with lethal efficiency. The tragic grieving mother was instantly recast as a sociopathic fraud. Vanessa attempted to brazen her way through the shifting tide. She believed her lifelong status as the favorite daughter would somehow shield her from the consequences of her own forgery. At 10 o'clock the next morning, she drove her luxury coupe to the Annapolis Country Club for her standard weekend tennis appointment. She walked through the brass double doors, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and her signature tennis whites, expecting the staff to cater to her usual demands. She approached the front reception desk. The head club secretary, a woman named Patricia, stood behind the polished mahogany counter. Patricia had spent 20 years memorizing the shifting hierarchies of the local elite. She did not offer Vanessa a warm greeting. She did not offer her a complimentary bottle of sparkling water. "I need your membership credentials, Miss George," Patricia said, keeping her voice flat and devoid of any hospitality. Vanessa sighed, acting profoundly inconvenienced. She reached into her leather handbag and produced the heavy, embossed plastic card granting her access to the exclusive amenities. She slid it across the marble counter. Patricia picked up the card. She did not swipe it through the digital reader. Instead, Patricia reached into her desk drawer and retrieved a pair of heavy steel office scissors. Without breaking eye contact, Patricia positioned the thick plastic between the steel blades. She squeezed the handles together. The sharp, cracking sound of the membership card snapping in half echoed loudly across the quiet reception lobby. Patricia let the two severed pieces drop into a plastic waste bin resting near her feet. "Your father contacted the steering committee early this morning," Patricia informed her. "Your privileges are permanently revoked. The valet has already been instructed to bring your vehicle back to the main entrance. You are no longer welcome on this property." Vanessa stood frozen in the lobby. For the first time in her life, her performative fragility failed to manipulate the person standing across from her. She turned around and walked out the glass doors, stripped of the only social currency she ever valued. Richard executed the final phase of her exile with cold, corporate precision. To protect his own standing among the yacht club directors, he invoked the notarized affidavit our mother drafted a decade earlier. He directed the estate attorneys to draft a binding exclusion order. Vanessa was formally and permanently excised from the George Family Trust. She would never receive another monthly stipend. She would never inherit a single share of the shipping fleet. My father sent a courier to her downtown Annapolis condominium later that afternoon. The messenger delivered a single certified envelope containing a harsh legal ultimatum. Richard commanded Vanessa to vacate the state of Maryland within 48 hours. If she attempted to contact him, or if she ever set foot inside the city limits again, he promised to hand my entire forensic dossier directly to the federal prosecutors. He would gladly watch her serve a federal sentence for wire fraud to ensure his pristine maritime legacy remained untarnished. With no independent income and her reputation obliterated, Vanessa had no leverage to negotiate. She spent her final night in Maryland packing her expensive designer clothing into cheap cardboard boxes. The contrast between her silk gowns and the raw, corrugated paper perfectly mirrored her sudden fall from grace. She loaded her car and drove away under the cover of darkness, disappearing into obscurity. She fled across state lines, leaving behind the opulent waterfront society she tried to conquer, using stolen prescription pads and cheap ballpoint pens. Grayson's professional ruin followed a similar trajectory of utter devastation. Richard ensured the local maritime industry closed its doors to his former son-in-law. A single phone call from the George family patriarch was enough to blacklist Grayson from every shipping firm, logistics company, and corporate port authority on the eastern seaboard. His resume became toxic overnight. Burdened with the shame of his catastrophic failure and facing potential civil litigation for the diverted corporate funds, Grayson found himself drowning in debt. The sprawling waterfront estate my father purchased for us became a financial anchor pulling him under. He could no longer afford the property taxes or the basic maintenance costs. Desperate to avoid a total bankruptcy declaration, Grayson was forced to liquidate the property. He sold the 6-bedroom mansion at a steep discount to a commercial real estate developer who intended to gut the interior and erase our history entirely. The man who loved aligning his titanium golf clubs in my grand foyer spent his final days in Annapolis supervising a discount moving crew. He packed his tailored suits and his empty ambition, leaving the maritime industry altogether. I heard a rumor that he secured a mid-level sales position at a regional supply company in the Midwest, far away from the yachts and the crystal chandeliers he once worshipped. The rumor mill that once sought to destroy my character now fed entirely on the spectacular ruin of my betrayers. The wives of the shipping executives who previously cast me as a jealous monster now spent their afternoons dissecting Vanessa's sociopathic greed. They praised my quiet dignity, pretending they supported my forensic investigation from the very beginning. Their loyalty was as fabricated as the stock photo ultrasound, but I did not care. I did not require their validation. I remained in my sterile Baltimore apartment, watching the high society drama unfold from a safe, calculated distance. I successfully dismantled their lies using cold, empirical data. I exposed the cowardice of my husband and the criminal extortion of my sister. I forced my status-obsessed father to enact justice against his own favorite child. The familial betrayal was resolved through a clinical execution of the truth. I won the war without ever raising my voice or shedding a single tear. But a forensic examiner never leaves a case file open. The destruction of their deceptive lives provided closure for the past, but it did not provide a trajectory for my future. I could not stay in Maryland. The air still carried the heavy, suffocating weight of my father's corporate influence and the shallow vanity of the yacht club elite. I needed a fresh environment where logic and verified evidence reigned supreme. The final chapter of my strategy required one last maneuver. I sat at my kitchen counter, organizing my professional credentials, waiting for a specific encrypted email to arrive from a federal director. The ensuing notification ping would signal the ultimate unchaining of my life, offering a new professional conflict far beyond the predictable waters of the Annapolis elite. The Baltimore apartment felt different on my final morning. The neon pharmacy sign outside my window was switched off, leaving the sterile room bathed in pale, natural sunlight. I stood at the kitchen island, surrounded by the tools of my trade. The previous 90 days required intense psychological endurance. I survived the destruction of my marriage and dismantled my sister's extortion scheme using these exact instruments. Now it was time to pack them away. I unplugged the ultraviolet document scanner. I wrapped the thick black power cord into a tight, precise coil and placed the device inside its padded carrying case. I dismantled the high-powered stereo microscope, wiping the sensitive optical lenses with a soft cloth before securing them in their customized foam compartments. Every click of a latch and every zip of a canvas bag signaled the closing of a turbulent chapter. My forensic laboratory was returning to its portable state. The final item resting on the counter was the 10-year-old envelope. I picked up my mother's handwritten letter, holding it carefully by the edges. The yellowed parchment felt lighter today. The heavy burden of its secret was gone. Evelyn George reached across a decade to hand me a shield, and I used it to shatter the false reality my father and my sister constructed. I slid the sworn affidavit into an acid-free archival sleeve. It was no longer a weapon. It was a historical artifact preserving the truth. I placed it gently into a secure leather folder and locked it inside my briefcase. My mobile phone vibrated against the quartz countertop. The digital display indicated an incoming call from a restricted Washington area code. I answered the call, keeping my tone professional and measured. A deep, calm voice greeted me. It was the deputy director of a federal intelligence agency. For the past 2 months, I had been undergoing an exhaustive background investigation for a high-level government position. The vetting process was rigorous. The federal agents dug deep into my financial history, my professional credentials, and the recent sudden dissolution of my marriage. They uncovered the yacht club scandal, the frozen George family trust accounts, and the forged medical records. They did not view my domestic situation as a liability. The federal investigators read the digital dossier I compiled against my sister. They saw the meticulous empirical data, the digital metadata extraction, and the flawless handwriting analysis. They admired my clinical execution of a highly complex extortion plot. The deputy director told me they needed that exact brand of unshakable ethics and cold intellect running their internal division. He formally offered me the position of Director of Document Forensics. The role came with federal security clearance, a substantial budget, and a mandate to analyze international fraudulent communications. I accepted the offer without hesitation. The terms were exceptional. But the true value of the position extended far beyond the generous federal salary. In Washington, no one cared about the George family maritime legacy. No one cared about yacht club memberships or country club lineage. They only cared about verifiable facts and analytical perfection. It was the ultimate clean slate. I ended the call and carried my packed bags down 3 flights of stairs to the street level. I loaded my equipment into the trunk of my 10-year-old sedan. The crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of fallen leaves and cold concrete. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. I merged onto the southbound highway, leaving the Baltimore city limits behind. The tires hummed a steady rhythm against the asphalt. As I crossed the county line, I glanced up at the rearview mirror. The reflection showed the receding highway and the distant gray skyline. I looked into the glass and thought about the people I was leaving in my wake. I did not feel any lingering bitterness. I felt a profound sense of emancipation. The Maryland elite prided themselves on their polite society, but they operated like a pack of wolves, waiting for the weakest member to stumble. I refused to play their game. I did not yell in crowded ballrooms. I did not stoop to their level of emotional melodrama. I did not hire predatory lawyers to drain their bank accounts. I simply let the truth do the heavy lifting. Grayson chose to protect his superficial status over our marriage. His cowardice cost him his career, his waterfront estate, and his reputation. He was currently working a mid-level sales job in a landlocked state, forever exiled from the maritime industry he worshipped. Vanessa chose to weaponize a fake pregnancy to steal corporate voting shares. Her boundless greed cost her the family trust fund and her precious social standing. She was forced to flee the state of Maryland, disappearing into obscurity to avoid a federal wire fraud indictment. My father chose to prioritize his immaculate public image over seeking the genuine truth. His performative vanity cost him his favorite daughter and forced him to endure a grueling, ongoing federal financial audit. Richard was now sitting alone in his sprawling, empty mansion, terrified that the Chicago accounting firm would uncover more discrepancies in his shipping ledgers. I did not destroy them. They built their own elaborate traps, using lies and stolen prescription pads. I merely provided the adequate lighting required to expose the tripwires. The drive down the parkway took less than an hour. The scenery shifted from the dense coastal woodlands of Maryland to the structured, monumental architecture of the capital. I navigated the busy avenues, pulling into the secure underground parking facility of my new agency building. I presented my identification to the armed guards at the perimeter checkpoint. They verified my credentials and waved me through the reinforced steel gates. I rode the quiet glass elevator up to the executive floor. The doors parted to reveal a pristine professional environment. There were no hushed whispers or judgmental stares. The analysts and agents moved with quiet purpose, carrying encrypted tablets and thick classified dossiers. An administrative assistant met me at the reception desk. She handed me my official federal badge and a set of brass keys. She guided me down a wide corridor lined with frosted glass doors, leading me to my new workspace. I stepped inside the corner office. The room was expansive and flooded with natural light. The floor was covered in thick, sound-absorbing carpet. In the center of the room sat a massive, solid mahogany desk. It was not a piece of furniture gifted by a wealthy father to control my behavior. It was a desk earned through merit and relentless intellectual discipline. I walked behind the desk and looked out the towering reinforced windows. The view was breathtaking. The bright autumn sky stretched over the iconic white dome of the Capitol building. The visual representation of genuine national power stood in stark contrast to the shallow, performative authority of the Annapolis elite. I belonged here. I placed my briefcase on the floor and took a seat in the high-backed leather chair. The leather creaked softly, settling under my weight. I rested my hands on the cool, smooth surface of the mahogany wood. A moment later, the frosted glass door swung open. A senior field agent walked into the office. He wore a dark suit and carried a thick manila folder sealed with red classification tape. He offered a polite nod of respect, acknowledging my new title. "Welcome to the Division Director, George," he said. "We have a time-sensitive situation regarding some questionable diplomatic manifests seized at the border. We need your eyes on the signatures immediately." He stepped forward and dropped the folder onto my desk. The heavy thud of the federal case file landing on the solid wood echoed through the quiet office. It was a deeply satisfying sound. It was the sound of a new conflict, a new puzzle waiting to be unraveled by careful observation. I reached out and pulled the file toward the center of the desk. I broke the red tape and opened the cardboard cover. The truth does not need to shout to be heard. It does not need to throw tantrums in country clubs or manipulate the sympathies of a crowd. The truth simply waits patiently, inside hidden drawers and beneath the blue glare of microscopic lenses. And when it finally steps into the light, it leaves no survivors. I picked up my pen and began to read. When the dust settles on a shattered dynasty, the silence that follows is rarely empty. It is heavy with the ghosts of unlearned lessons and the lingering echoes of generational failures. Looking back at the wreckage of the George family, the frozen trust funds, the exiled daughter, the humiliated patriarch, I am reminded that the most devastating tragedies in modern American society do not occur in dark alleys. They happen in brightly lit living rooms, orchestrated by people wearing silk and smiling for the cameras. As someone who walks the quiet path of spiritual cultivation, observing the frantic pursuit of status in today's culture, I see a profound spiritual famine masquerading as abundance. We have mastered the art of curating our external lives while allowing our internal foundations to rot into dust. The story of Beatrix, Vanessa, and their parents is not just a tale of forensic vindication. It is a desperate, flashing warning light for the traditional American family. It begs us to ask what we are truly building when we raise our children, and what fragments of our souls we are willing to sacrifice to keep up the appearance of perfection. To parents navigating the complex, highly competitive landscape of modern American culture, The Fall of Richard George serves as a harrowing masterclass in the dangers of misplaced values. Richard built a formidable maritime empire and provided his children with every conceivable material advantage. Yet he failed in the most fundamental duty of parenthood, the cultivation of moral integrity. In his world, a country club membership was treated as an acceptable substitute for character, and public reputation was guarded far more fiercely than private honesty. When parents prioritize superficial evidence of success, the right zip code, the prestigious marriage, the flawless holiday photograph, over the messy, uncomfortable truth of who their children actually are, they do not protect their offspring. They arm them with the very weapons of their own destruction. Evelyn George understood her youngest daughter's sociopathic tendencies, yet out of a paralyzed fear of her husband's wrath and societal ostracization, she hid the truth in a cedar desk rather than confronting the sickness head-on. Traditional family education must rely on the unshakable pillars of honesty, fairness, and profound emotional awareness. When we sweep a child's lies under the rug to avoid a public scene, we silently teach them that deception is entirely acceptable, provided it is well dressed. We raise Vanessa's fragile, greedy, and utterly devoid of the resilience needed to face reality. Parenting is not the art of shielding a child from the consequences of their actions. It is the grueling, sacred work of guiding them through the fire of those consequences so they might develop genuine morality. If you wish to raise strong, capable adults, you must be willing to endure the temporary embarrassment of their failures. You must demand the absolute truth, even when it shatters the pristine glass house you have spent your entire life building. From Beatrix, the youth of today must extract a radically different blueprint for survival. In a society that routinely rewards loud, emotional melodrama and performative victimhood, Beatrix offers the quiet, unyielding power of self-cultivation. When her world collapsed, when her husband betrayed her and her sister fabricated a monstrous, life-altering lie, Beatrix did not engage in a hysterical screaming match. She did not seek validation from the very community that was actively vilifying her. Instead, she turned inward. She relied on the wisdom born of patient observation and the willpower forged through dedicated, honest work. Young people today are constantly pressured to react to defend their image instantly on every digital and social platform, fighting for control of a fleeting narrative. Beatrix teaches us the profound, terrifying strength of the pause. True resilience is the ability to stand in the exact center of a burning room and carefully measure the temperature. She cultivated her mind relying on facts, science, and empirical truth, rather than allowing herself to get swept away by the toxic emotional currents of the people around her. She demonstrates that true independence is not merely financial. It is the absolute spiritual freedom that comes from knowing you do not need a corrupt system's approval to validate your intrinsic worth. To live a truly beautiful life, one must possess the wisdom to see through deception, the moral integrity to refuse participation in it, and the resilience to walk away when the environment becomes toxic. The George family's collapse is a microscopic reflection of a society that has forgotten how to look inward. We spend decades accumulating wealth, securing elite social networks, and maintaining the perfect facade, all while remaining spiritual infants. The traditional American family structure is a beautiful vessel, but if it is not filled with the steady waters of fairness and emotional awareness, it becomes a brittle shell, ready to crack at the slightest pressure. We must cultivate our own inner gardens before we can expect our children to blossom. We must have the courage to be brutally honest with ourselves about our own cowardice, our own vanity, and our own complicity in the lies we allow to flourish under our roofs. We must correct our own spirits before we can hope to guide another. These quiet, desperate battles for the soul are happening in dining rooms and corporate boardrooms every single day, hiding just beneath the surface of polite conversation. If you find strength in stories where calm clarity triumphs over chaotic deceit, take a moment to subscribe and follow Morning Revenge, where we continue to explore the quiet justice that waits patiently for the truth to be told. As you look at the architecture of your own life, ask yourself what illusions you are desperately paying to maintain. The conventional wisdom of our society dictates that betrayal demands a loud, destructive war, and that securing your reputation is the ultimate necessary victory. But the truth is far more subversive. The ultimate revenge is not the annihilation of those who wronged you. It is the sudden, chilling realization that your enemies were never truly your enemies at all. They were merely mirrors reflecting the precise illusions you were always destined to outgrow.